Welcome, dear traveller, to this gentle hour of rest. Let your shoulders soften, let your breathing slow, and allow the weight of your day to drift away like smoke curling from a distant chimney. Tonight, you are invited on a quiet journey, a soft passage through the veil of time, to a place where the world moved at the pace of a flickering candle and the sound of a horse's hoof upon worn earth. Imagine, if you will, that the modern world has gently faded behind you. The hum of electricity is gone, the glow of screens has dimmed into nothing. In its place rises a different kind of light, warm and amber, dancing upon hand-hewn timbers and whispering across glass that ripples like still water. You stand at the edge of a cobblestone lane in the colonial town of Williamsburg, Virginia, in the autumn of the year 1770, and the evening air is soft upon your skin. There is no hurry here, there is no urgency, no demand. There is only the slow, patient unfolding of an evening long ago, preserved like a pressed flower between the pages of history. Take a deep, easy breath. Settle into your pillow, your blanket, your favorite chair. Let your eyes grow heavy as the lantern light beckons. The tavern door waits just ahead, its weathered oak warm with the glow of the fire within. Step softly. The past is opening to receive you. Before we cross that threshold together, before the hinges sigh and the warmth of the hearth wraps around you, let this gentle moment linger. The lane is quiet, the lanterns sway just so, casting their soft halos upon the dust of the road. Somewhere in the distance, a fiddle begins a slow and unhurried tune, the kind played not for dancing but for dreaming. If you find that this slow wandering through history brings you peace, if the texture of these old stones and the murmur of these forgotten voices carry you gently towards sleep, then know that there are many more such evenings awaiting you, many more quiet streets, many more candlelit rooms, many more hours of soft history kept warm for those who wish to rest within them, to remain in this gentle company, to be guided again and again into these soft corners of the past. You need only follow along, subscribe with a quiet tap, and ring the small bell so that each new evening of slumber may find you wherever you may be. But for now do not stir from your comfort. There is nothing to do, nothing to remember, nothing to chase. Simply allow yourself to be here, in this twilight hour, in this colonial lane, where the wood smoke drifts low and the windows of the tavern glow like honey. Let your eyes drift closed, or let them remain half open, watching the slow shimmer of candlelight upon old glass. The door is opening now, the keeper has heard our soft approach. Let us step inside, you and I, and find our place by the fire. The door of the Raleigh Tavern yields to your gentle touch with a sound that belongs entirely to another century. A low and contented groan of seasoned oak swinging upon iron hinges that have known the comings and goings of 1,000 evenings. The hinges themselves are forged by hand, each one slightly different from its neighbour, their black iron darkened further by years of wood smoke and the patient oils of countless palms. As the door swings inward, the cold air of the lane is left behind, and in its place there rises to greet you a warmth so complete, so layered with comfort, that you may feel your shoulders drop of their own accord, though some unseen hand has reached out to lift away the small burdens you carried in with you. The first thing you notice is the air itself, for the air within a colonial tavern is unlike any air you have ever breathed in your modern hours. It is thick and softly perfumed, woven through with a dozen quiet scents that mingle and drift like slow currents in a deep river. There is the warm, nutty aroma of beeswax candles burning steadily upon the tables, their honeyed fragrance rising in slender ribbons toward the low timbered ceiling. There is the deeper, smokier perfume of the great hearth fire, where seasoned hickory and oak crackle gently upon iron fire dogs, releasing the sweet scent of woodlands long since gone to sleep beneath the autumn frost. And beneath these, woven into the very fabric of the room, there lingers the gentle perfume of supper recently served, of roasted fowl and stewed apples, of fresh bread broken upon pewter plates, of cinnamon and clove warming in mulled cider. You take a breath, slow and deep, and the warmth of that air enters you like a tide of comfort, settling somewhere in the centre of your chest. Your eyes, still adjusting from the dim lane outside, begin to find the soft contours of the room, The light here is not the harsh, flat light of the modern world. It is a living light, a breathing light, a light that flickers and sways and casts long, gentle shadows that move with the slow patience of dreams. It comes from candles set in pewter holders upon the tables, from oil lamps suspended from the beams overhead, and most of all from the great fire that burns within the brick hearth at the far end of the room. Each source of light carries its own particular hue, the candles offering a soft golden cream, the oil lamps a warmer amber, and the fire a deep and shifting orange that pulses with the breath of the flames. The floors beneath your feet are made of broad pine planks, each one a hand's breadth wide or wider, their surfaces worn smooth and slightly cupped by the passage of countless boots. The planks themselves laid in a time when trees grew tall and slow in the great forests of the Virginia colony. Where the planks meet, you can see the faint, dark lines of seasoned wood, and where the firelight touches them, the wood glows with a deep honeyed warmth, the grain rising in soft swirls and ripples like the surface of a pond stirred by a gentle wind. There are small rugs scattered here and there, woven of wool and dyed with the muted colours of the old natural pigments, indigo and madder and walnut hull, their patterns simple and pleasing to the eye. The walls of the tavern are sheathed in horizontal pine boards, painted a soft and dignified shade of green, the kind of green that one finds in old 18th century recipes for paint made from copper and oil and a patient hand. The paint is not perfectly even, for it was applied with a brush of horsehair and laid down in layers over the years. And so the surface holds within it a subtle texture, a quiet topography of small ridges and gentle valleys that catch the firelight and release it again as the flames dance. Above the wainscoting, the upper portion of the walls is plastered and whitewashed, the white softened to a warm cream by the candles and the years of wood smoke, and along the high seam where the wall meets the ceiling, there runs a simple moulding of carved pine, its profile a gentle ogee curve that draws the eye softly upward. The ceiling above you is low enough that a tall man might reach his palm to touch it, and it is crossed by great hewn beams of yellow pine, each beam square in section and marked along its sides with the soft rhythmic scallops left by the broad axes that shaped them. These beams are dark with the smoke of generations, and between them the plaster shows the faint impression of the lath beneath, a quiet reminder of the patient hands that built this place board by board, peg by peg, stroke by stroke. You stand for a long, easy moment within this gentle envelope of warmth, allowing your senses to settle. The murmur of the room is low and pleasant, a soft tapestry of voices conversing in the unhurried cadences of a vanished age, of the gentle clink of pewter against pewter, of the soft scrape of a wooden chair upon a wooden floor, of the quiet sigh of a log shifting in the fire. Nowhere is there any sound that is sharp or hurried, nowhere is there any voice raised in alarm. The room breathes as a single living thing, and you are now a part of its slow and steady breath. A young man in a linen apron passes near you, his footsteps soft upon the pine boards, his hands occupied with a tray bearing tankards of something warm and aromatic. He nods to you with a gentle, courteous tilt of the head, the kind of greeting that speaks of an age when manners were a quiet currency exchanged freely between strangers. His apron is clean but well used, the linen softened by many washings, the ties knotted at the small of his back in a simple bow. His shirt beneath is of a pale unbleached linen, and his breeches are of a soft brown wool, fastened just below the knee with small pewter buckles that catch the firelight as he moves. You begin to walk slowly into the room, your footsteps quiet upon the worn pine, and as you walk you notice how the warmth of the hearth grows stronger with each step, how the scent of the wood smoke deepens, how the soft golden light of the fire reaches out to touch your face like the warmth of a long-forgotten summer afternoon. The journey across the floor is itself a small unhurried pilgrimage, each plank passing beneath your feet a small measure of time, each step bringing you deeper into the gentle heart of the evening. There is a chair waiting for you near the hearth, a simple Windsor chair with a comb back and turned legs, its wood polished to a soft gleam by years of use. The seat is a saddle of pine gently scooped to receive you, and as you lower yourself into it, you feel the chair accept your weight with the quiet assurance of a friend who has been waiting all evening for your arrival. The fire crackles gently before you, its flames dancing in slow and patient rhythms, and you allow your eyes to half close as the warmth spreads through you, soft and deep and complete. The hearth before you is a thing of considerable presence, a great brick mouth set into the eastern wall of the public room, its opening tall enough that a child might walk into it without stooping, its width broad enough to accept logs as long as a man's arm. The bricks themselves were made not far from this very spot, fired in a kiln of clay drawn from the banks of a nearby creek, and each brick bears within it the soft variations of colour that mark the handmade article, ranging from a deep rust orange to a paler salmon, to here and there a brick that has been kissed by the kiln's hottest tongue and emerged the colour of dark plum. The mortar between the bricks is a soft cream lime, slightly recessed, and along the joints there runs a thin thread of soot that has settled patiently over the years, like the faint signature of every fire that has ever burned within this hollow. The lintel of the hearth is a single great timber of seasoned oak, its underside darkened to near black by decades of rising smoke, and along its lower edge there hangs a slender iron rod from which depend a series of pothooks and trammel hooks, each one shaped by the slow patient hand of a colonial blacksmith. The trammel hooks are particularly fine, their lengths adjustable by means of small notched bars that allow a cook to raise or lower a pot above the flames with the gentle precision of a watchmaker setting a tiny wheel. From one of these hooks tonight there hangs a great copper kettle, its rounded belly polished to a soft pink gold by many a careful hand, its interior tinned with bright pewter so that no metal taint may pass into the water within. The fire itself is a slow and contemplative one, the kind of fire one builds for an evening of long sitting, rather than for the quick boil of a morning kettle. The logs are laid not in a chaotic pile, but in a careful arrangement. 2 great backlogs at the rear, a smaller forelog at the front, and between them a quiet bed of glowing coals that shifts and settles like a sleeping creature. The flames that rise from this bed are not the bright leaping flames of fresh kindling, but the deeper, lazier flames of well-established combustion. Flames that move with a slow swaying grace, their colours ranging through the entire spectrum of warm light, from the deep ember red at the base to the softer orange in the middle to the pale yellow at the tips, and now and again a flicker of blue or green where some mineral in the wood releases its hidden chemistry to the air. You watch the fire for a long time, and as you watch you begin to perceive how the light it casts is not a single light but 1,000 lights, each of them in motion, each of them telling its own small story upon the surfaces of the room. The light dances upon the brass of a candlestick set on the mantel, breaking into small bright stars where the metal has been polished smooth. It pours like liquid honey across the worn pine of the floor, gathering in the cupped hollows of the planks, and pooling in the seams between them. It throws long slow shadows upon the green wainscoting, shadows that breathe and stretch and shrink with the breathing of the flames, so that the entire room seems to inhale and exhale in time with the fire. Above the fire, set into the brick of the chimney breast, there hangs a simple wooden mantel, a single thick board of pine painted the same soft green as the walls, its edges chamfered with a gentle bevel. Upon this mantel there rests a quiet collection of objects that speak of the life of the tavern. A pair of brass candlesticks of moderate height, a small pewter pitcher of the sort used for warm milk, a clay pipe with a long slender stem, small wooden box that might contain tinder or perhaps tobacco, and at the very centre a clock of simple wooden case whose face is painted with delicate Roman numerals, and whose pendulum swings in slow and steady measures behind a small glass door. The clock makes a sound that, once heard, becomes the very heartbeat of the room. It is not a loud sound, not a hurried sound, but a soft and perfectly regular tock, a wooden syllable that falls upon the air with the patience of a leaf settling upon still water. Tock, tock, tock. Each tock is followed by a quiet pause and then another tock, and in the spaces between you may hear the gentler sounds of the fire, the soft whisper of a flame curling around a piece of bark, the small dry sigh of a coal collapsing into the bed below, the faint hiss of moisture escaping from the deepest part of a log. The hearth tools stand beside the opening in a small iron rack, each one designed for a particular task and shaped by the hand of a craftsman who understood the daily rhythm of firekeeping. There is the long-handled poker, its end forged into a slight hook for drawing forward a stubborn log, its shaft blackened by long use. There is the shovel, its scoop of beaten iron, its handle of turned wood worn smooth as river stone by the grip of generations. There is the pair of tongs, their long arms hinged at the top and their blackened tips designed to grasp a glowing coal with the gentle precision of fingers. And there is the small iron broom, its bristles of stiff cornsilk, its handle of split hickory used for sweeping the hearthstone clean of ash before each new fire is laid. You watch as the keeper of the tavern, a man of middle years with a kindly weathered face and a soft brown coat of homespun wool, kneels for a moment beside the fire and tends to it with the unhurried care of one who has tended 10,000 such fires in the course of his life. He selects a small log from the wood box that stands nearby, a piece of well-seasoned oak whose grain glows a faint gold in the firelight, and he sets it gently upon the bed of coals at just the angle that will allow the air to flow beneath it and feed the slow and steady combustion. He does not poke or stir the fire unnecessarily. He does not bustle. He simply places the log, watches it for a quiet moment until he is satisfied that it has caught, and then rises again, his joints cracking softly, and turns away to his other small tasks. The wood box itself is a quiet thing of beauty, a deep rectangular chest of pine boards joined with hand-cut dovetails at the corners, its lid hinged with simple iron strap hinges, its lower edge worn pale by the brush of many a sleeve. Within the box, the logs are stacked with a careful eye, the larger pieces at the bottom, the smaller pieces above, and at the very top, a small bundle of fat wood splinters bound with a piece of jute string, ready to coax a new fire to life upon the morrow's chill morning. The logs themselves are each a small biography of the forest, some bearing the soft silver bark of beech, some the rough plaited bark of oak, some the shaggy strips of shagbark hickory, each one cut and split and seasoned through a full turn of the seasons before being deemed worthy of this hearth. You let your eyes drift slowly upward along the chimney breast where the bricks rise in their patient courses toward the ceiling, and you imagine the great hollow column of the chimney as it climbs through the upper floors of the tavern and out into the night sky above, where the smoke from this very fire is rising even now in a slow grey plume against the early stars. The thought is a soothing one, a gentle reminder that this fire is connected by an invisible thread to the wide, quiet sky above, and that you yourself, sitting here in your Windsor chair, are connected by the same thread to the cool autumn night, the rising stars, the great patient turning of the world. Allow your gaze to drift now from the hearth and let it travel slowly across the public room of the tavern, taking in the gentle geometry of the space, the careful arrangement of tables and chairs, the soft choreography of corners and alcoves that the colonial builder has set down with such patient skill. The room is not large by the standards of any later age, perhaps 30 feet in length and 20 in breadth, but it possesses the curious quality of feeling at once intimate and ample, a place in which one might sit alone with a book and feel comforted, or sit among a dozen friends and feel unhurried. The tables are arranged in 2 loose rows, one running along the wall opposite the hearth, the other set out in the centre of the room, with a generous passage between them so that the serving folk may move easily about their work. Each table is a sturdy thing of seasoned oak, its top a single broad plank or sometimes 2 planks joined edge to edge with the careful precision of the joiner's plane, its legs square and tapered joined by stretches of the same wood close to the floor. The tabletops bear within them the gentle marks of 100 suppers, small darkened rings where hot tankards have rested, faint scratches where a knife has slipped from its work, soft lighter patches where a damp cloth has been drawn back and forth in the patient ritual of cleaning. These marks do not diminish the tables, they enrich them, they are the slow biography of the wood written in the small daily hand of the tavern's life. Around each table there sit 4 or 6 chairs, mostly Windsor chairs of the kind on which you yourself are settled, though a few are straight-backed ladder back chairs with rush seats woven of cattail or bulrush. The Windsor chairs are particularly pleasing to the eye, their seats hewn from a single block of pine, their legs and stretchers turned upon a great pole lathe in some Williamsburg workshop, their spindles rising in slender, graceful curves toward the comb that crowns each back. Each chair is painted, some in a soft black that has worn down at the edges to reveal the warm brown of the wood beneath, some in a deep red that has mellowed with age into the colour of dried roses, some in a green that matches the wainscoting of the walls. The light of the room is gathered into pools and eddies by this arrangement of furniture, and as you let your eyes wander, you may observe how each table has its own small island of illumination, its candles standing upon a pewter holder at the centre, the light spilling outward in a soft golden circle that fades gently into the warmer dimness beyond. At one such table there sit two gentlemen in earnest, quiet conversation, their heads bent together over a folded sheet of paper that catches the candlelight in pale ivory creases. One of the gentlemen wears a coat of deep indigo blue, its cuffs turned back to reveal a lining of soft cream silk, and a waistcoat of pale buff linen embroidered with small floral sprigs in silk thread. The other wears a more sober coat of dark brown broadcloth, his waistcoat of a darker buff, his shirt cuffs falling in soft white frills over the backs of his hands. Their voices reach you only as a low murmur, a warm and pleasing texture rather than a series of words, and you find that you do not strain to hear them. You allow their conversation to remain their own, a private exchange that adds its quiet thread to the larger tapestry of the room. They speak of matters that interest them, perhaps of tobacco prices in the Tidewater, perhaps of a horse to be purchased at the next race meeting, perhaps of a letter recently arrived from a kinsman in London or Charleston. But you need not know the substance of their talk. It is enough that they are here, that they are at ease, that their unhurried voices weave themselves into the gentle music of the evening. At another table, set closer to the front window of the tavern, an older gentleman sits alone with a small leather-bound book open before him, his spectacles perched at the end of his nose, his finger moving slowly down the page as he reads. His coat is of black wool, plain but well kept, and he wears a small white wig of modest size, its curls tightly rolled at the sides and gathered at the back into a neat black silk bag. The candle at his elbow burns steadily, and as he turns each page, the soft whisper of the paper rises briefly above the murmur of the room, a gentle rustle that calls to mind the turning of leaves in a quiet wood. The window beside him is a thing of considerable beauty, though it makes no effort to draw attention to itself. It is a sash window of 12 small panes over 12. The wooden muntins painted white, each pane of glass made in the old Crown method by a glass-blower whose breath gave the molten globe its first form. The result is glass that is not perfectly flat, glass that holds within it a faint ripple, a slow swirl, a soft curvature that catches the candlelight and refracts it into small unexpected gleams. Through the lower panes you may see the lane outside, the cobblestones glistening faintly with the evening damp, a single lantern swaying gently from the eaves of the building opposite, its light drifting in slow halos across the night. Above the window, set into the wall in a quiet alcove, there hangs a framed print of modest size, an engraving in black and white depicting a view of the River Thames, a remembrance of London held by some traveller of an earlier year, and left here as a small offering to the room. The frame is of dark walnut, its corners mitered with a careful hand, and the glass before the print is the same crown glass that fills the windows, slightly rippled, softening the lines of the engraving into a dreamlike haze. You let your eyes drift further along the wall and notice how the pegs of dark-turned wood are set at regular intervals along a long horizontal rail, and from these pegs there hang the various coats and hats of the patrons who have chosen to leave them there for the evening. Tricorn hat of black felt, its brim pinned up at 3 points with small brass tacks, hangs near the door. Beside it depends a heavy travelling cloak of dark grey wool, its hood lined with a soft red flannel that shows where the wind has folded back the corner. Further along there is a riding coat of stout brown camlet, its skirts long enough nearly to brush the floor, its collar turned up against the memory of a cold ride into town. The pegs themselves are of a kind one finds throughout the colonial world, simple turned mushrooms of cherry or maple, their stems driven into augured holes in the rail, their caps polished smooth by the constant brush of fabric. The rail upon which they are set is of the same painted green as the wainscoting, and the small dark dots of the pegs against this soft green field have something of the quality of a row of musical notes upon a great staff, marking the slow time of the room. Beyond the pegs at the far end of the room, you may glimpse the door that leads into the private parlour, and beyond that into the narrow stair that climbs to the chambers above. But for now your eyes return to the closer comforts of the public room, to the warmth of the hearth, the soft breathing of the candles, to the patient tock of the clock upon the mantel. You sink a little deeper into your chair, and you feel the chair receive you, and you find that the room has become, in this small unhurried hour, a kind of gentle home. Toward the western wall of the public room opposite the hearth, there stands a feature of the tavern that is at once practical and curiously beautiful, a structure that the colonial age called by the simple name of the bar, though in this period it is more often a kind of enclosed cage of turned spindles than the long polished counter that later centuries will know. This bar is a small chamber set within the larger room, its three walls formed of slender wooden balusters turned upon a lathe and set close enough together that a hand might pass between them, but not a tankard. The balusters are painted the same soft green as the wainscoting of the room, and at their tops they are joined by a horizontal rail of the same painted wood, and at their bottoms they are set into a low sill that runs along the floor. Within this enclosure, which is perhaps 8 feet wide and 4 feet deep, the keeper of the tavern presides over the gentle commerce of the evening. There is a counter of well-scrubbed pine running across the front of the cage at the height of a man's hip, its surface bearing the soft pale tones of wood that has been washed clean of stain 1,000 times, the grain rising in fine pale ridges where the softer summer wood has worn away faster than the harder winter wood. Upon this counter rest a few of the implements of the keeper's quiet trade, a small set of brass scales for the weighing of coin or tobacco, a pewter measure of the half-pint, a small earthenware bowl for the receiving of pennies, a leather-bound ledger-book with a dark red cloth marker, and a quill pen standing upright in a pewter inkwell. Behind the keeper, set against the western wall, there rises a tall cupboard of painted pine, its many small doors and drawers fitted with simple brass pulls and tiny iron locks. Within the cupboard, glimpsed through a pair of glazed doors at its upper section, there are arrayed the bottles and decanters from which the keeper draws the various refreshments of the house. The bottles are of dark green or amber glass, their shapes irregular in the manner of all hand-blown glass, their shoulders slightly uneven, their bases bearing the faint scar where the pontil rod was broken away, their corks sealed with small rounds of red or black wax stamped with simple devices. There is a decanter of sherry, the wine within glowing, a soft copper gold in the candlelight, and beside it a decanter of Madeira, deeper and more amber in hue, its surface catching the firelight in slow languid gleams. There is a smaller bottle of fine brandy from France, its label a hand-inscribed paper card tied around the neck with a length of fine cord, and beside it a stoneware jug of West India rum, its glaze a mottled grey and brown, its handle worn smooth by the keeper's grip. Upon a lower shelf there sit several pewter tankards of varying sizes, polished to a soft pewter sheen, their handles curving outward with the easy grace of long use, and beside them a row of small wine glasses with slender stems and softly fluted bowls. The keeper himself is a man of perhaps 50 years, of moderate stature, his hair drawn back into a small queue tied with a black ribbon at the nape of his neck. He wears no wig, for he is at his work and within his own house, and his own hair is a soft iron grey streaked here and there with strands of darker brown that recall the chestnut of his youth. His face is weathered and kindly, his eyes a clear pale blue, the small lines around them suggesting a temperament more given to gentle amusement than to sternness. He wears a waistcoat of dark green wool over a shirt of unbleached linen, the sleeves of the shirt turned up to the elbow against the warmth of his work, and a long apron of dark linen tied about his waist with a simple knot. His movements within the small enclosure of the bar are economical and unhurried. the movements of a man who has performed these same small tasks 10,000 times and who has long since pared away every wasted motion. When a serving boy approaches the bar with a request for 2 tankards of cider and a glass of Madeira, the keeper draws down a cider jug from a low shelf, fills the 2 pewter tankards with a slow, steady pouring that produces no foam and no spill, sets them upon the counter, then turns to the cupboard behind him to take down the Madeira decanter. The pour of the Madeira is even slower, more deliberate, the wine moving in a slender amber thread from the lip of the decanter into the small fluted glass, where it gathers in a small jewel of colour that the candlelight kindles into a soft inner glow. You watch this small ceremony from your seat by the hearth, and you find that there is something deeply restful in observing the unhurried competence of another's work. There is no haste in the keeper's hands, no anxious glance toward the door, no muttered tally of the orders that wait upon him. There is only the gentle flow of one task into another, a stream of small accomplishments that runs as smoothly and as steadily as the cider into the tankard, as the Madeira into the glass. The serving boy receives his tray with a quiet word of thanks, a young fellow of perhaps 16 years whose face still carries the faint pinkness of recent boyhood, his shoulders not yet broadened into the breadth they will know in another 5 years. He balances the tray with the practiced ease of one who has done this work since he was 12, the muscles of his forearm finely calibrated to the small adjustments that keep the tankards from sliding, the glass from tipping. He turns and sets off across the room with a soft tread, his low-heeled shoes making no sound upon the worn pine planks. Within the bar enclosure, the keeper now takes up his ledger book and opens it to the page set aside for the present evening. He dips his quill into the small pewter inkwell, taps the excess against the rim, and writes in a careful hand a small notation, the date in the left margin, the order in the body of the line, the price in the right margin. His script is the round, looping hand of the late colonial period, each letter formed with patience, the long S's curling like small fronds of fern, the capitals adorned with modest flourishes that do not pretend to elegance, but suggest only a quiet pride in a lifetime of careful bookkeeping. The ink itself is a homemade preparation, a mixture of oak galls and iron sulphate and a little gum arabic, and upon the page it begins as a pale grey that will darken over the coming hours to a deep blue-black, so that tomorrow morning when the keeper opens the ledger to review the night's accounts, the words he wrote tonight will have ripened into their full and final colour, like fruit upon a slow autumn vine. The page itself is a soft cream-laid paper made in a Pennsylvania mill, its edges deckled and slightly irregular, its surface bearing the faint chain lines of the wire mesh upon which the pulp was first laid down. When he has finished his entry, the keeper closes the ledger with a soft small thud and sets the quill back into its inkwell. He looks up from his counter and casts a slow, kindly glance about the room, taking in the patrons at their tables, the fire upon the hearth, the boy returning with his empty tray, the gentleman reading by the window, and yourself settled in your Windsor chair by the fire. His eyes meet yours for the briefest of moments, and there is in his glance no demand, no question, no expectation, only a soft welcoming nod, an acknowledgment that you are here and that you are at ease and that the evening will unfold around you at whatever pace your spirit may require. Let your gaze travel now toward the front of the public room, toward the windows that open upon the lane, and let your eyes rest for a long, slow moment upon the soft wonder of those panes of old crown glass. The window is set within a frame of painted white pine, the muntins crossing in a careful grid that divides the larger opening into 12 small rectangles in the upper sash and 12 more in the lower, 24 small portals through which the night beyond is rendered in 24 small, slightly different versions of itself. For each pane of crown glass, having been spun upon the end of a long iron rod and flattened by the centrifugal motion of the glassblower's craft, holds within it a faint and individual character, a slow ripple here, a small bubble there, thin curving line where the cooling glass remembered for an instant the shape of its motion. The effect of all of this is that the world beyond the window is not given to the eye in the hard precision of a modern pane, but rather offered as a gentle suggestion, a soft watercolor rendering in which the cobblestones of the lane shimmer slightly with each small movement of the head, which the lantern hanging from the eaves of the milliner's shop opposite seems to swell and shrink with the breathing of the evening, in which the very stars beginning to prick the sky above the rooftops appear to dance softly upon the slow waves of the glass. To look through such a window is to be reminded that vision itself is a kind of small miracle, a transformation of the world into the inner chamber of the mind, and that a touch of softness in the medium of that transformation can render the whole of a quiet evening into something close to a dream. The lane outside is broader than any modern street of comparable importance, for the colonial planners of Williamsburg laid down their thoroughfares with a generous hand, allowing room for the passage of carriages, of horsemen, of pedestrians, and of the occasional small herd of cattle being driven from one pasture to another at the changing of the seasons. The cobbles are not perfectly even, for they were laid by hand and have settled with the years into the particular contours of the underlying earth, but they are well kept, and the gutters at either side of the road carry away the rains of autumn with the quiet efficiency of a system designed by people who understood the daily commerce of weather and water. Across the lane the buildings present themselves to your softened gaze as a row of gentle rectangular forms, each one a story or two in height, each one painted in a quiet colour drawn from the limited palette of the colonial age, soft creams and pale blues and the dignified deep red called Spanish brown, with here and there a building of plain whitewashed brick or weathered clapboard left in its natural silver grey. Each building wears its own small hat of a roof, some of cedar shingles split by hand and weathered to the colour of old smoke, some of slate brought up from the south, and each chimney rises in a slender brick column with a small puff of smoke drifting from it into the deepening dusk. A single figure passes along the opposite walkway, a man in a dark cloak whose tricorn hat is pulled low against the cool air, his lantern swinging gently from his hand as he walks. The lantern is of pierced tin, a cylindrical thing with a small conical roof and a hinged door, and the candle within it casts a soft moving pattern of small bright spots upon the cobbles before him as he goes. Each step of his is unhurried, the slow, steady stride of a man returning home after a quiet evening's errand, and as he walks the lantern's pattern of light moves with him in a small bright congregation, a flock of glowing dots that follows him faithfully from one cobble to the next. Above the rooftops, the sky is undergoing the long, slow transformation that only those who lived before the age of artificial light could fully appreciate, the slow surrender of day into night, the gentle bruising of the western horizon from gold to rose to lavender to that particular deep violet that holds within it the first promise of darkness. Single early star has appeared above the chimneys, hanging there with the quiet steadiness of a single drop of dew upon a leaf, and as the minutes pass other stars begin to emerge, one by one, each one a small soft spark in the deepening blue. You watch the sky and the lane and the slow-walking figure and the swinging lantern, and you find that within the small frame of the window the entire mood of the evening is gathered as if into a soft painting. Domestic landscape whose colours and movements compose themselves with a quiet harmony that no later age, with all its powers of representation, will ever quite recapture. There is something in the wavering of the old glass that introduces into the very perception of the world a small element of forgiveness, a softening of the edges of things that is itself a kind of consolation. You let your eyes drop from the window to the broad sill below, where the white painted wood holds a small collection of objects placed there by the keeper or by some long-forgotten patron of an earlier evening. There is a small earthen pot of dried lavender, its purple flowers faded now to a dusty grey lilac, but still releasing into the warm air a faint perfume of summer fields when one passes near. Beside the lavender there sits a small carved wooden bird, a sparrow perhaps, fashioned by the hand of a country whittler from a piece of soft pine, its eyes mere dots of black ink, its wings folded against its sides in the patient repose of carved things. And beside the bird there lies a single white feather, a goose quill perhaps dropped by some passer-by and left there as a quiet ornament. These small objects, none of them important, none of them remarkable, none of them noticed by most of the evening's patrons, possess together a quiet poetry that speaks to the deeper character of the place, They suggest a life lived in attention to small things, in the patient noticing of the bird upon the sill, the feather upon the floor, the dried sprig of lavender that retains its perfume long after its colour has gone. They are the small reminders of the unhurried mind that the colonial age, for all its labours and its hardships, knew how to cultivate. The lane beyond the window grows gradually quieter as the hour deepens. The walking man with his lantern has passed beyond the limit of your view, and the cobbles are empty now, gleaming faintly in the last reflected light of the gathering evening. From somewhere down the lane, perhaps from the open door of another tavern, or from the second floor of a private house, there comes the faint and unhurried sound of a violin, a single long note drawn out slowly across the strings, and then another, and then a slow series of notes that have not yet quite resolved themselves into a melody, but seem to be feeling their way toward one with the patience of a person remembering an old half-forgotten song. The note of the violin comes through the wavering glass of the window in a softened, distant form, as though the glass itself were filtering away the sharper edges of the sound and leaving only the warmer underlying tone. And you find that this distant music adds to the room a new layer of soft enchantment. The fire crackles gently. The clock tocks upon the mantel. The keeper writes a small entry in his ledger. The gentleman by the window turns a page, and outside, through the soft ripples of the old crown glass, the slow violin spins its quiet thread into the deepening blue of the night. The serving boy has returned to your side, and at his quiet inquiry you have indicated, by a small and easy nod, that you would welcome a plate of whatever the kitchen has to offer at this hour. He is gone again as softly as he came, and now you settle further into your chair to await the small ceremony of the evening meal, which in the Colonial Tavern is conducted not as the hurried refuelling of a modern hour, but as a slow and patient gathering of pleasures, sequence of small offerings, each one of which is meant to be tasted, considered, and honoured before the next is brought forward. In a few minutes' time the boy returns, balancing upon his tray a quiet still life of pewter and wood and earthenware. He sets each item before you with a slow, deliberate hand, and you have the leisure to observe each one as it is placed upon the small round side table that stands between you and the hearth. There is first a pewter charger of moderate size, its surface polished to a soft luminous grey, its rim adorned with a simple beaded moulding, and upon this charger there rests a portion of roast capon, the bird's flesh moist and pale beneath a skin that has been crisped to a soft golden brown by the slow turning of the spit. Beside the capon, there are a few spoonfuls of a stew of roots in which the soft orange of carrots, the cream of turnips, the deep yellow of parsnips, and the green of leek tops mingle together in a thick savoury broth that has reduced over many hours upon the kitchen fire into a glaze of considerable depth and richness. The broth is flecked with the small green leaves of fresh thyme and parsley, and at its centre floats a small medallion of butter that is even now melting slowly into the warmth, sending up a slender thread of steam that catches the candlelight. There is a smaller plate, this one of soft creamware ceramic, edged with a simple pattern of pierced openwork, upon which sits a wedge of yellow cheese, its surface slightly crumbling, its colour the deep gold of a late summer afternoon. Beside the cheese there are a few quartered apples, their flesh a pale cream against their red and green skins, dressed with a faint dusting of cinnamon from the East Indies that has been ground by hand in a small wooden mortar within the tavern's kitchen. There is a basket of bread lined with a square of clean white linen, and the bread itself is a round small loaf of wheaten flour, its crust the colour of old burnished copper, its interior a soft pale crumb that releases a quiet fragrance of yeast and warm grain when broken. The boy has set beside the basket a small wooden bowl of fresh butter, the butter pale and almost white, its surface ridged with the small impressions of the wooden paddles with which it was worked, and a tiny pinch of coarse salt that catches the candlelight in small bright crystals. And there is a tankard of cider, the cider drawn from a barrel that the keeper presses each autumn from the apples of his own orchard, its colour a clear dark amber, its surface bearing a thin pale crown of foam that subsides slowly into the body of the drink. The tankard itself is of pewter, somewhat larger than would be polite at a formal table, its handle curving outward with the worn ease of long handling, and as you lift it, the weight is solid in your hand, the metal cool against your palm, the rim smooth and slightly thickened where it has been turned for a comfortable lip. You begin to eat slowly, as the room itself eats slowly, in the gentle, unhurried manner of the age. The first taste of the capon is a small revelation. The meat firm but yielding beneath your knife and fork, the flavour a deep clean note of pasture-raised bird, finished with the faint ghost of the small handful of sage that was pressed into the cavity before roasting. The skin where it has crisped is shatteringly thin, and the fat that lies just beneath it is rendered soft and silken, melting upon the tongue with a warmth that seems almost the warmth of the hearth itself. The root stew, lifted upon a small pewter spoon with a turned wooden handle, offers up its mingled sweetnesses and earthinesses in a single warm mouthful. The carrots have taken on a touch of caramel from their long, slow cooking. The turnips have shed their faint pungency and become tender and creamy. The parsnips have grown almost as sweet as the carrots, and the leeks have softened into pale ribbons that slip easily between the tines of the fork. The broth holds all of these flavours in a single warm embrace, and the green of the herbs offers a small clean lift against the richness of the whole. Small piece of bread, broken from the loaf and lightly buttered, is the perfect companion for such a stew. The crust offers its soft crackle, the crumb its tender chew, the butter its quiet creamy sweetness, and the small pinch of salt its bright accent that wakes up every other taste upon the tongue. You eat the bread slowly, in the manner of one who has nowhere else to be, and you find that each bite seems to carry within it the entire long story of its making. The wheat grown in some Virginia field, the milling at the small water-powered mill outside of town, the kneading by some pair of patient hands in the kitchen this very afternoon, the rising in a bowl beside the kitchen hearth, the baking in the brick oven whose heat was tempered by the careful judgment of the cook. Small sip of cider follows the drink cool and tart upon the tongue, the apple sweetness coming through in the second moment, a faint delicate fizz tickling the back of the palate, and a quiet warmth settling into the chest as the cider goes down. The cider is not the strong rough drink of country fairs, but a more refined version of itself, fermented to a moderate strength, clarified by long settling in the cellar barrel, perhaps lightly sweetened with a small spoon of brown sugar or a whisper of honey. It pairs with the capon and the stew with the easy companionship of long acquaintance. You eat in this way for a long, unhurried time, alternating small bites of capon with small spoonfuls of stew, with small pieces of bread, with small sips of cider, with the occasional pause to glance into the fire, or to listen to the distant violin, or to watch the slow movements of the room. There is no haste, no compulsion to clear the plate. The pewter charger is broad enough to hold its food without crowding, and the supper before you is generous enough that it would be quite impossible to finish in any single sitting without some loss of pleasure. You eat as much as you wish, and then you allow your fork and knife to rest upon the rim of the charger, and you turn your attention to the cheese and apples upon the smaller plate. The cheese is a sharp-aged cheese of the country style, made from the milk of cows that grazed upon the late summer pastures of a farm a few miles outside of town, its texture dense and slightly crumbling, its taste at once nutty and tangy with a small clean saltiness in the finish. Thin slice of cheese laid upon a quartered apple is one of the simple perfections of the colonial table, the soft tartness of the apple lifting the deep richness of the cheese, the cinnamon adding its warm aromatic note, the whole composing a small autumnal poem upon the tongue. When at last you have eaten as much as your evening's appetite desires, you set down the small plate, you take a final slow draught of the cider, and you sit back into the chair with that quiet sigh of contentment that is the body's small thanksgiving for a meal taken in peace. The boy will return in his own time to clear the things away, and there is no need to hurry him. The plate may sit there for as long as it wishes. The evening, after all, is itself a kind of long, slow supper, of which the food has been only one quiet course. Permit your eyes to drift once more about the room, but this time with a closer and more affectionate attention to the patrons gathered in its various corners. For each of them is a small unwritten story, and the slow observation of these gentle figures will carry you further into the deep inward stillness of the hour. The room contains tonight perhaps a dozen souls, no more, and each one has come for reasons of their own, and each one is engaged in their own quiet business of being human in the soft enclosure of an autumn evening in the year 1770. At the table nearest the hearth, on the side opposite where you sit, there are seated 3 gentlemen of middle years who appear to be merchants by the cut of their coats and the careful precision of their hands. The eldest of them is a man of perhaps 60, his hair a soft snow white drawn back into a neat queue and tied with a black ribbon, his face long and thoughtful, his nose a fine aquiline curve, his eyes a pale grey that hold within them the soft reserve of one who has spent a lifetime in careful weighing and measuring. He wears a coat of dark plum-coloured broadcloth, well cut but not new, the wool slightly napped at the cuffs from long wear, and a waistcoat of pale dove grey silk with small buttons of polished horn. His companions are younger, men of perhaps 40 and 45, both dressed in coats of darker hue, one of deep brown camlet, the other of black wool with small pewter buttons. They listen to the elder gentleman with the particular attentiveness of those who have known him long and respect him well, and as he speaks his hands move in slow small gestures, illustrating perhaps the dimensions of a cargo hold or the path of a voyage from one port to another. Their conversation reaches you only as a low murmur, but the cadences of it speak of long acquaintance, of business pursued without urgency, of an evening shared between friends rather than rivals. Upon the elder gentleman's table there sits a small clay pipe, its long slender stem white with the kaolin of its making, its small bowl darkened by use to a soft amber brown. Beside the pipe there is a small leather pouch of tobacco drawn loose at the top, and as you watch he reaches with a slow, easy hand for a small pinch of the leaf, packs it gently into the bowl of the pipe, and leans toward the candle to light it. The first puff sends up a slow blue-grey cloud that hangs for a moment in the still air above the table before drifting upward toward the beams of the ceiling, where it joins the older accumulated smoke of the room in a soft and gentle haze. The fragrance of the tobacco is a particular fragrance of the period, the smoke of the cured Virginia leaf, sweet and earthy and warm, with a faint note of the fine molasses with which the tobacconist has lightly cased the cut. It mingles with the wood smoke of the hearth and the beeswax of the candles and the warm fragrance of supper to compose that particular bouquet that is the perfume of the Colonial Tavern at its most contented hour. At a table closer to the front of the room there sits a young woman in the company of an older gentleman who is perhaps her uncle or her father, the resemblance of feature suggesting a familial connection while the difference in age suggests a guardian rather than a husband. She is perhaps 22 years of age, her hair a soft warm brown drawn up beneath a small white linen cap that is trimmed with a narrow band of fine lace, the lace itself the work of some patient hand in a Flemish convent or perhaps an English country house. Her gown is of a soft sage-green silk, simple in cut but well made, the bodice fitted closely to the waist, the sleeves ending in small lace cuffs at the elbow, the skirt full and falling in soft pleats to the floor. She wears a fine kerchief of white linen folded across her shoulders and tucked into the bodice of her gown, the kerchief edged with a small embroidered border of cream silk thread in a pattern of vines and small flowers. At her throat there is a slender ribbon of black silk, from which depends a small oval miniature in a brass frame. The miniature itself perhaps a likeness of her mother, painted in watercolour on ivory by some itinerant limner. She sits with the easy quiet posture of one who has been taught from girlhood the small graces of bearing, and her hands rest folded in her lap as she listens to the gentleman opposite her. The gentleman, who must be her father, is a man of perhaps 55, his dress more formal than that of the merchants by the hearth, his coat of fine black broadcloth with covered buttons, his waistcoat of cream silk embroidered at the front edges with a delicate pattern of small flowers in pale gold thread. He wears a powdered wig of moderate size, the curls neat and tightly rolled, the queue gathered behind into a small black silk bag tied with a black ribbon. His face is kindly and dignified. His eyes are clear hazel beneath dark brows, and as he speaks to his daughter, his hand rests upon the table beside a small book of devotions bound in dark red leather with gilt-edged pages. They appear to be discussing some matter of mild family interest, perhaps a letter recently received, perhaps a piece of news from a distant relation, and as they speak, the daughter offers small, thoughtful replies, the voice low and modulated and pleasing to the ear even at the distance from which you observe her. There is something about the quiet companionship of this father and daughter that adds to the room a layer of gentle domesticity, a reminder that the tavern of this period was not exclusively the haunt of men, but a place where families of standing might come for an unhurried evening's refreshment. In the further corner of the room, in an alcove shaded by a small folding screen of japanned wood, there sits a single gentleman whom you have not noticed before. He is older than the merchants, older perhaps even than the father by the window, a man of perhaps 70 years, his hair entirely white and worn long over his collar without the formal restraint of a queue. His coat is of a soft grey wool, much worn but clean, and his hands rest upon the head of a slender walking stick of dark wood, whose brass cap catches the candlelight in a small steady gleam. He does not speak, he does not eat. He simply sits, his eyes half closed, his face composed in the soft repose of a man who has come to the tavern for the small comfort of company, without the labour of conversation. The screen behind him is itself a thing of quiet beauty, its panels painted in the chinoiserie manner with small scenes of pagodas and willow trees and tiny figures crossing arched bridges. The colours are soft red and gold and black that catch the firelight in 1,000 small bright points. The screen is older than most of the furnishings of the room, perhaps a piece brought over from England in an earlier decade and donated to the tavern when its previous owner had no further use for it, and its presence in this alcove offers the older gentleman a small private kingdom within the larger public room. Then there is the serving boy whom you have already noticed, and a serving woman whom you now observe for the first time. She has emerged from a small door at the rear of the room that leads, you suppose, into the kitchen, and she carries a wooden tray bearing a small pewter coffee pot from which a slender ribbon of steam rises into the warm air. She is a woman of perhaps 35, her dark hair drawn up beneath a white linen cap, her gown of a simple striped homespun in shades of blue and cream, her apron of unbleached linen tied at the waist. Her face is pleasant and capable. Her eyes are warm brown, and as she moves about the room delivering coffee to those who have ordered it, her step is light and unhurried, the step of a woman who has long since learned to carry her work as a kind of slow, steady dance. When the serving woman opens the small door at the rear of the public room to pass back into the kitchen, you catch for a brief moment a glimpse of another world entirely, a warm and busy world that lies just beyond the soft enclosure of where you sit. The door swings open and then closed again in the space of a breath, but in that breath you have seen enough to begin imagining the kitchen as it must be, and as your eyes drift back to the fire and your thoughts drift further inward, allow yourself to follow the serving woman in your mind. Step in imagination through that small door and into the heart of the tavern's daily nourishment. The kitchen is a long, narrow room set behind the public room and connected to it by a passage in which the serving folk move back and forth with their trays. At the far end of the kitchen, beneath a great brick chimney that rises through the roof of the building like a small tower, there stands the cooking hearth, a vast opening of brick and iron and stone that is the very heart of the tavern's daily life. This hearth is far larger than the one in the public room, perhaps 8 feet wide and 4 feet deep. Its lintel a great timber of charred oak, its floor a single broad slab of soapstone polished smooth by generations of pots and feet. Within the cooking hearth a fire of considerable size is even now burning, though it is not the leaping fire of the morning when the great cauldron of breakfast porridge must be brought to a boil, but the quieter, more managed fire of the evening, the fire that has been gentled down to a deep glowing bed of coals upon which the slower dishes of the night may be brought to their final perfection. The coals lie in a soft pulsing carpet of orange and rose, and from them there rise a few small dancing flames, blue at the base and yellow at the tips, that move in slow patient rhythms with the breathing of the warm air. Above the bed of coals there hangs by a great iron crane a black iron cauldron of considerable age, its interior glazed with the dark patina of 1,000 stews and broths, its handle worn smooth by countless gripping hands. From the cauldron rises a slender plume of steam that catches the firelight and turns within itself in slow curling spirals before disappearing up the wide black throat of the chimney. Within the cauldron, a stew of beef and root vegetables and red wine has been simmering for the better part of the day, its surface bearing a soft, dark glaze, iron jack worked by the slow descent of a hanging weight. There turns a long horizontal spit upon which several small fowl are roasting. The spit turns with a quiet, patient rotation, perhaps once every half-minute, and as each fowl makes its slow revolution the firelight catches the burnished skin and brings forth from it a small bright gleam like the slow turning of a small constellation. Beneath the spit there is set a long shallow dripping pan of tinned iron, into which the fat of the roasting bird slowly falls in small bright drops, gathering there with the chopped onion and herbs, and a little cider that the cook has placed in the pan to make the basting sauce. The cook herself is a stout, cheerful woman of middle years, her hair drawn up beneath a white linen cap that is somewhat larger and more practical than the cap of the serving woman, her face flushed slightly with the warmth of her work, her sleeves rolled up to the elbow to reveal forearms that are pale and strong and marked here and there with the faint white traces of old kitchen burns long since healed. She wears a gown of dark blue homespun, much faded at the shoulders, and over it a long apron of unbleached linen that bears the small stains of the day's work, a smear of butter here, a small dark spot of berry juice there, pale dusting of flour about the front where she has rested her hand against herself while pausing in her labours. She moves about the kitchen with the unhurried efficiency of long practice, lifting the lid from the cauldron to give the stew a slow stir with a long-handled wooden spoon, basting the fowl upon the spit with a brass ladle dipped into the dripping pan, checking the bread that bakes within the small brick oven that is set into the side of the hearth, opening the iron door of the oven with a long-handled peel, and drawing out a small round loaf whose crust has just achieved that particular deep gold she requires. The kitchen around her is filled with the quiet, beautiful clutter of its daily purposes. Upon a long wooden table that runs down the centre of the room, there are gathered the small implements and ingredients of the supper hour. A wooden bowl of fresh sage leaves that have been picked from the garden behind the tavern that very afternoon, pewter measure of cream just brought up from the cool spring house, a small earthenware crock of butter, a wooden trencher upon which lies a portion of beef being cut into small cubes for tomorrow's pie, brass mortar and pestle holding a few carefully bruised peppercorns whose perfume rises fresh and sharp into the warm air. Along the walls there hang the cooking vessels of the establishment, a great collection of copper pans of varying sizes, each one polished to a soft pink gold and showing the small bright spots where the tinning has been recently renewed by the travelling tinker who comes through Williamsburg every few months with his small portable forge. There are pots of black iron, smaller cauldrons of cast iron, ladles and skimmers and slotted spoons, all of them blackened with use, all of them organised in the small rational order that the cook has long since established for her own convenience. Above the table there is suspended from the ceiling a stout wooden rack from which there hang bundles of dried herbs, the herbs that the cook has gathered from her garden through the seasons and hung up here to dry against the long winter of cooking that lies ahead. There are bunches of thyme, grey-green and fragrant, of sage with its softly furred leaves, of rosemary with its thin needle leaves and its piney perfume, of parsley curled and dark, of mint with its sharper, sweeter smell. There are small bundles of dried red peppers, their skins shrunken and shiny, hanging upon their slender stems like small bright lanterns. There are a few onions, long and pale, their outer skins crackling, suspended by their tops from the rack. The herbs together compose a quiet cloud of fragrance that fills the kitchen with the patient memory of summer. In one corner of the kitchen there is a small alcove fitted with shelves, and upon the shelves there are arrayed the spices and condiments that come from far away, the small precious things that have crossed oceans to arrive at this kitchen in this little colonial town. There are stoneware jars of nutmegs and mace from the Spice Islands, of cinnamon sticks from Ceylon, of cloves from the Moluccas, of black peppercorns from the Malabar coast. There are small glass bottles of essences and waters, of orange flower water and rose water, brought up from the West Indies or perhaps from the Mediterranean. There are small paper twists of saffron, of cardamom, of star anise, each one carefully tied with a piece of fine string. Upon another shelf there are crocks of preserves and pickles that the cook has put up through the year, of strawberry jam from the June fruit, of peach preserves from the August trees, of apple butter cooked down through long October afternoons, of pickled cucumbers and onions and beets, of cherries in brandy, of plums in honey. Each crock bears a small paper label in the cook's careful hand, the date of its making, the name of its contents, and the small signature of the cook in the lower corner, like the mark of an artist upon a finished canvas. You imagine all of this through the brief glimpse afforded by the swinging of the kitchen door, and as the door closes once more upon the public room you settle further into your chair, content in the knowledge that just beyond the wall there is this warm and fragrant sanctuary, in which the slow, careful labour of feeding and comforting goes patiently forward, labour whose fruits arrive at your small table in the form of a plate of capon and a tankard of cider, but whose deeper substance is the long, quiet love of the cook for her work, and for the people who will sit by the fire to eat it. The voices of the room compose, when one listens with the quiet attention of an unhurried hour, a kind of music, a slow, soft polyphony in which several conversations weave themselves together into a single gentle texture of sound. No one speaks loudly here, no one speaks in haste. The cadences of speech in this colonial age are slower than those of any later period. The consonants more carefully formed, the vowels more fully voiced, the sentences drawn out with a patience that allows each idea to rest for a moment in the air before yielding place to the next. To listen to the conversations of the tavern is to listen to a kind of human breathing, an exchange of slow breaths between minds that have not yet learned the haste that the centuries to come will teach. At the table of the merchants, the conversation has turned to the matter of a recent shipment of indigo from the Carolinas, and the elder gentleman is describing in his careful manner the particular qualities of the dye that distinguish a fine cake from an indifferent one. He speaks of the depth of the blue, of the smooth, even texture of the cake, of the way that a small piece broken from the corner reveals an interior of uniform colour, of the quiet weight of the cake in the hand, neither too dense nor too light. His listeners nod slowly, occasionally interjecting a small word of agreement, or asking a careful question about the price per pound at the wharves of Norfolk. You catch only fragments of their talk, a soft murmur of words like freight and factor and consignment, and the autumn fleet. But the rhythm of their exchange is itself a pleasure to listen to. The way the elder gentleman's slow, careful cadence is met by the younger men's more attentive replies, the way each speaker waits patiently for the other to finish before adding his own thought, the way silences are allowed to settle between exchanges without any sense of awkwardness or impatience. This is conversation as it was practiced before the age of haste, when a pause was understood to be part of the music rather than an interruption of it. At the table by the window, the gentleman and his daughter have begun a quieter exchange about a matter closer to the heart, the daughter speaking of a piece of needlework she has lately undertaken, sampler in which she is working out a verse of poetry surrounded by a border of small flowers and birds. She describes the particular shade of silk thread she has chosen for the lettering, a soft dark blue called Prussian blue that she purchased at a haberdasher's shop in the town that morning. And she speaks of the small difficulties she has encountered in working the chain stitch around the curving stems of the leaves. Her father listens with the patient attention of a man who knows that the small matters of a daughter's daily occupation are the very fabric of her young life and deserve to be honoured with the same care that he would give to a question of considerable business. He asks her in a soft, kindly voice what verse she has chosen for the central panel of the sampler, and she replies with the small, pleased smile of a young woman whose father has remembered to ask, naming a stanza from a poem of Mr. Cowper that she has lately read and admired. Her father nods slowly, his face composed in an expression of quiet appreciation, and he remarks that the verse is well chosen, and that the sampler will be a fine remembrance when it is finished. In the quieter alcove beyond the screen, The elderly gentleman with the walking stick has not spoken at all, but his silence is itself a kind of conversation, a wordless companionship with the room and its slow doings. Now and again he opens his eyes a little wider, and his gaze travels slowly about the room, taking in the merchants, the family by the window, the keeper at his bar, and the slow turning of the candles in their pewter holders. There is in his face the quiet pleasure of one who has lived long enough to need no more than the simple presence of human company, the warmth of a fire, the soft hum of voices, to feel himself entirely at peace. The serving boy and the serving woman move between the tables in their unhurried orbits, and their voices when they speak to the patrons are the soft modulated voices of the colonial servant. Voices trained by long custom to be neither loud nor obsequious, but simply pleasant, small, gentle current of sound that flows through the room without disturbing its larger music. "Will you have another tankard, sir?" the boy asks the youngest of the merchants, and the gentleman replies, "I shall thank you, John, but slowly, slowly, for the night is young." The boy nods with a small smile and turns away, and his quiet step joins the slow texture of the room. Above the human voices there continues the soft accompaniment of the room's own music, the slow tock of the clock, the gentle crackling of the fire, the quiet hiss of a candle whose wick has reached a small inconvenience in its melting and is correcting itself, the faint rustle of a turned page from the gentleman who reads alone by the front window. The violin from down the lane has continued its slow exploration of half-remembered melodies, and now and again a phrase of music arrives through the wavering glass of the window in a softened, distant form, lending the room a momentary sweetness before fading once more into silence. The customs of conversation in this room are governed by an unwritten code that every patron has absorbed without conscious thought. One does not interrupt, one does not raise the voice. One does not speak across the room to a friend at another table, but waits for the natural moment when one may rise and walk over and exchange a quiet greeting in a more proper manner. One does not crowd in upon another's conversation, but respects the small island of privacy that each table has been granted by virtue of its position within the room. The very arrangement of the furniture, with its generous spaces between the tables, encourages this gentle privacy, and the soft murmur of each conversation reaches the others only as a pleasing background rather than as an intrusion. Now and again a new patron enters the tavern, and the small ritual of his arrival adds a fresh note to the room's slow music. The door opens with its low, contented groan. The newcomer steps inside, removes his hat with a slow practiced gesture, brushes the dust of the lane from his coat, and stands for a moment to allow his eyes to adjust to the soft amber light of the room. The keeper looks up from his bar, offers a small nod of welcome, and the newcomer nods back. He hangs his hat upon a peg, his cloak upon another, and then proceeds to whatever table appeals to him, settling himself with the easy comfort of one who has been here before and knows the small geography of the room. Such an arrival has occurred only twice during the long hour you have been seated here, and each time the disturbance to the room's music has been minimal, a small new voice added to the chorus, a small new figure added to the slow dance. The room is generous enough to absorb such additions without losing its gentle equilibrium, and within a few minutes the new patron has settled into the rhythm of the place and his presence has become indistinguishable from that of the others. You yourself have not yet spoken a word since entering the tavern, and you find that this silence is no impediment to your participation in the life of the room. The patrons have understood by some quiet intuition that you are here as a watcher rather than a talker, that you have come to drink in the atmosphere of the place rather than to add your own voice to its music, and they have made room for your silence as easily as they have made room for the elderly gentleman's silence in his alcove. Yours is the silence of the contemplative, of the dreamer, of the one who finds in observation a deeper participation than speech could ever offer. The voices of the room continue their soft, slow weaving, and you find that you can hardly tell any longer where one conversation ends and another begins, where the human speech merges into the crackling of the fire and the tock of the clock and the distant violin, where the music of the room becomes simply the music of the evening itself. It is all one great quiet song, and you are a listener within it, and the song requires nothing of you but your willingness to listen, which you give freely and without effort, settling deeper into your chair as the slow notes wash over you. There are small rituals that govern the colonial evening, small gentle ceremonies that have grown up over the generations to mark the slow passage of the hours from supper towards sleep, and as you sit in your Windsor chair and let your senses open to the room around you, you may begin to perceive these rituals at their quiet work. The first of them, and perhaps the most pervasive, is the ritual of the slow drink, the long, unhurried consumption of whatever beverage has been chosen for the evening, taken in small sips spaced out across many minutes, so that a single tankard of cider might last an entire hour, and a single glass of Madeira might accompany an entire conversation. To take a small sip and then set the cup down again, to allow the taste to linger upon the tongue, to feel the small gentle warmth descend through the chest, to wait several minutes before lifting the cup once more, this is the ritual of the slow drink, and it is one of the small wisdoms of the age. It allows the drink to remain fresh and pleasing throughout the evening, rather than overwhelming the palate in the first quarter hour. It moderates the effects of the alcohol, allowing for warmth and good cheer without the dulling of the senses. It honours the drink itself, treating each sip as a small event worthy of attention, and it enforces by its very pace the quiet, unhurried tempo that the evening requires. You yourself, raising your tankard of cider to your lips and taking a small, slow draught, find that you have unconsciously absorbed this ritual and that you are content to sip and pause and sip again as the slow minutes pass. The cider has cooled slightly since it was poured, and at its cooler temperature its flavours are even more clearly defined: the apple sweetness, the small clean tartness, the soft autumnal bitterness of the skins, the gentle warmth of the alcohol coming through in the finish like a distant bell. The second ritual of the colonial evening is the ritual of the careful tending. Throughout the room, in small unobtrusive gestures, the patrons and the servants are tending to the small details of their immediate environment, attending to the candles whose wicks may need a small trim, to the fire which may need the addition of a small log, None of these tendings is performed in haste. None of them is performed with any sense of irritation at the imperfection that has prompted it. They are performed slowly, calmly, almost lovingly, as small acts of care that maintain the fabric of the evening at its proper level of comfort. You watch as the keeper, having finished his entry in the ledger, takes up a small pair of brass snuffers from the counter of his bar and crosses the room with a slow, measured step to attend to a candle on one of the merchant's tables. The candle has been burning for some time, and its wick has grown long and is beginning to mushroom slightly at the tip, its flame dancing with that small, unsteady flicker that betokens a wick in need of attention. The keeper approaches the candle, lifts the snuffers, and with a single soft motion clips the long wick away, allowing it to fall harmlessly into the small box within the snuffers themselves. The flame steadies at once, returns to its gentle upright burning, and the keeper turns away to attend to the next small task. The merchants do not pause in their conversation. They have hardly noticed the keeper's intervention, so smoothly and so quietly has it been performed. And yet the small adjustment has improved the light of their table by some small measurable degree, has saved them perhaps a quarter-hour of imperfect illumination, thus demonstrated in the smallest possible way that the fabric of the evening is being maintained by the patient attention of those whose business it is to maintain it. This is the ritual of the careful tending, and it runs throughout the evening like a quiet silver thread in the larger fabric of the room's life. The third ritual of the colonial evening is the ritual of the slow leave-taking. When a patron has decided that the time has come to depart, he does not simply rise and march to the door. He gathers himself slowly, finishes his drink at his unhurried pace, perhaps lights a final pipe of tobacco to mark the closing chapter of his visit, exchanges some final words with his companions, calls the serving boy over to settle his account, takes his time about the settling, perhaps offers a small gratuity with a quiet word of thanks, then rises from his chair, stretches gently, walks to the wall of pegs to retrieve his hat and cloak, dons them without haste, calls a final farewell to the keeper and to any acquaintances among the patrons, and at last passes through the door into the night, with the soft, unhurried tread of one who has had a complete and satisfying evening and is in no hurry to relinquish its memory. This ritual of the slow leave-taking will be performed at some point this evening by every patron in the room, you among them, but for now no one is leaving, and the room is held in the long, pleasant middle hour when the supper has been eaten, and the conversations have settled into their evening cadence, and the fire has reached its steady glow and the candles have burned down to perhaps 2/3 of their original height. It is the hour when the tavern's character is at its fullest and its most particular, the hour for which the whole long day has been a slow unfolding preparation. A fourth ritual, performed less frequently but with great quiet ceremony when it occurs, is the ritual of the offered toast. At one of the merchants' tables now there is a small flurry of attention as the eldest of them rises slightly in his chair, lifts his glass of Madeira, and offers some small sentiment in a voice raised just enough to carry to his companions. To the safe arrival of the Polly, he says, naming perhaps a ship in which they all have an interest, and his companions raise their own glasses in response, the three glasses meeting briefly in the soft amber light of the candle, the wine within them catching the firelight and trembling slightly as the glasses touch. The toast is brief, the moment is small, but it carries within it the entire weight of the colonial age's understanding that life is woven of small ceremonies, that the lifting of a glass in honour of some present good is itself a small act of grace that enriches the act of drinking and weaves the participants together into a closer fellowship. The merchants drink, set down their glasses, and return to their conversation. But the air around their table seems to have been brightened by the small ritual, as though a small invisible bell has been rung, whose vibrations linger in the room. The fifth ritual of the colonial evening, and the most subtle of them, is the ritual of the gradual descent. As the evening proceeds, the entire mood of the room moves slowly downward, not in spirit but in pace, in volume, in intensity. The conversations grow quieter, the movements grow slower, the candles burn lower, the fire is fed less often, the voices drop to a softer register, the laughter, when it occurs, is gentler. The whole room is settling, like a pond settling after the wind has died, like a leaf descending through still water, toward the deep stillness that will mark the final hour of the night. You feel this gradual descent in your own body and in your own mind. Your shoulders, which were already soft when you sat down, are now even softer. Your eyelids, which had been merely heavy, are now drooping with a gentle determination toward the closing of vision. Your breathing has deepened and slowed. Your fingers, which had been resting upon the arms of your chair, are now nearly still. The tankard of cider has been set aside, perhaps half full, and you have not reached for it in some minutes. The room's slow descent has become your own descent, and you are sinking with it toward the deep, restful place where the evening is bringing all of its inhabitants. This sinking is itself a kind of pleasure, the kind of pleasure that the modern world has largely forgotten how to grant itself, the pleasure of allowing oneself to grow gradually quieter and quieter, slower and slower, softer and softer, without resistance, without anxiety, without the modern compulsion to maintain alertness against some imagined danger or some unfinished task. The colonial evening teaches its patrons that there is nothing more to be done, that the day's work is over, that the supper has been eaten, that the conversations have been had, that the candles have been lit and tended, and that what remains is simply the long, slow surrender to the night that is wrapping itself around the tavern like a great soft blanket of stars and silence. Above the public room of the tavern, reached by a narrow stair that rises from a small landing near the rear passage, there lie the chambers in which the travellers of the night will take their rest. Allow your imagination to climb that stair with the slow and patient tread of a guest at the close of his evening. Allow your hand to rest upon the smooth, dark banister polished by 100 years of palms, and allow your mind to enter the upper rooms of the house with the gentleness that the hour now invites. The stair itself is a thing of pleasing geometry, made of pine treads worn slightly cupped by long use, its risers painted a soft white that has yellowed with the years to the colour of old cream, its banister a slender turned spindle of dark walnut whose surface holds the warmth of the room below for a long way up the climb. At the top of the stair there is a small landing perhaps 4 feet square, lit by a single oil lamp set in a brass bracket upon the wall, and from this landing there open 3 doors, one to the right, one to the left, one straight ahead, each door leading into one of the chambers in which the travellers may sleep. The chamber to the right is the largest, perhaps 14 feet square, with a single window in the eastern wall that will catch the morning sun. The door to this chamber is of pine panelled in the simple 2-panel manner, its surface painted the same soft white as the risers of the stair, its iron latch worn to a dark grey gleam by the gentle use of countless hands. When the door is opened, it swings inward upon hinges that have been recently oiled, and it makes a small, soft sigh that is almost a whisper of welcome. The room beyond is furnished with the simple comforts that the Colonial Inn affords to its better guests. The bed is a tall 4-poster of dark cherry wood, its posts turned with a graceful baluster pattern, its head and footboards plain and slightly bowed, its tester above hung with a canopy of deep red wool. The mattress is of plump goose feathers laid upon a foundation of straw, the whole covered with a great smooth coverlet of indigo linen embroidered along its border with small white flowers in a simple chain stitch. The pillows are 2, also of goose feathers, encased in covers of soft white linen edged with a narrow band of plain hemstitching. To the right of the bed, set against the wall, there stands a small chest of drawers of the same dark cherry as the bed, its 3 drawers fitted with brass pulls in a simple bale pattern, its top serving as a small dressing table. Upon the top of the chest there has been placed a brass candlestick with a fresh white candle, a small pewter basin and ewer for the washing of hands and face in the morning, a small white linen towel folded into a neat rectangle, and a small earthenware pot of the lavender water that the keeper's wife has prepared from the lavender of her garden. To the left of the bed there is a single wooden chair of the rush-seated kind, its frame of maple painted a soft black, and upon the chair the traveller may lay his coat and waistcoat in preparation for the night. Beside the chair there is a small, low stand that holds a chamber pot of glazed earthenware, modestly screened by a small cloth curtain hung from a slender wooden rod, the curtain itself of a soft indigo cotton that matches the coverlet of the bed. In the corner of the room near the window there stands a tall, narrow cupboard of pine painted the same soft white as the door, in which the traveller may hang any longer garments such as a great coat or a riding cloak. The cupboard is fitted within with a row of wooden pegs upon which the garments may be suspended, and a small shelf at the top upon which the traveller's hat box or other small luggage may be placed. The walls of the room are sheathed with vertical tongue and groove pine boards painted a pale buff yellow that catches the candlelight in a soft creamy glow, and along the seam where the wall meets the ceiling there runs a simple moulding of carved pine, no different from the moulding in the room below. The floor is of broad pine planks, similar to those of the public room, and a small woven rag rug has been placed beside the bed so that the traveller's bare feet when they descend in the morning may meet a soft, warm surface rather than the cool boards. The window is fitted with a single sash of 12 small panes over 12, similar to the windows below, and over the window there hangs a simple curtain of indigo linen that may be drawn across in the evening for privacy. Through the window, when the curtain is drawn back, the traveller may see the lane below, the gabled roof of the building opposite, the slender chimneys rising into the night sky, and beyond them, when the air is clear, the great soft expanse of stars that the colonial age still possessed in its full undimmed glory. The chamber across the landing, to the left, is somewhat smaller and is designated for travellers of more modest means or for single occupancy. Its furnishings are similar in kind to those of the larger chamber but reduced in scale: a smaller bed without a tester, a single small chest, a single chair, a smaller window, a simpler arrangement of cloths and candlesticks. Yet, for all its smaller dimensions, the room possesses the same essential atmosphere, the same warm glow of candle and fire, the same soft white painted walls, the same broad pine floor, the same quiet promise of restful slumber. The third chamber, the one whose door faces directly across the landing from the stair, is the largest of all the upper rooms, intended for a gentleman travelling with his lady or for a small family party. It contains 2 beds, a great 4-poster like the one in the eastern chamber, and a smaller trundle bed that may be drawn out from beneath the larger for a child or a servant. The room is hung with a paper of soft pale blue with a small repeated pattern of cream-coloured stems and leaves, the paper applied to the walls in long vertical strips by some patient craftsman of an earlier year. There is a small fireplace in this room, its hearth cold tonight, its mantle of painted pine bearing only a small porcelain shepherdess and a pair of brass candlesticks. Each of these upper chambers, the air carries the same particular fragrance that one finds in well-kept colonial rooms, a clean and quiet smell composed of beeswax candles, lavender water, well-aired linen, the faint perfume of cider from small sachets tucked into the drawers, and the deeper underlying note of the seasoned pine of the walls and floor. There is no dampness, no mustiness, no stale air. The keeper's wife and the chambermaid have aired these rooms each morning by opening the windows wide for an hour or two regardless of the weather, and the rooms have been filled and refilled with the clean autumn air of the lane. The travellers who will sleep in these rooms tonight have not yet ascended. They are still below in the public room, finishing their suppers, exchanging their last conversations of the day, perhaps lingering over a final small glass of Madeira or a final pipe of tobacco. In an hour or two they will rise from their chairs, take up their candles from the side table by the stair, climb the worn pine treads with their unhurried tread, and enter their chambers for the long, slow ceremony of preparing for sleep. The ceremony of preparing for sleep is itself a small art in this age, a careful sequence of small actions that compose, taken together, a kind of evening prayer of the body. The traveller enters his chamber, sets his candle upon the chest of drawers, removes his coat, and hangs it upon the peg in the cupboard, sits upon the chair to remove his shoes, unties his stock from about his neck, and folds it carefully upon the chair, removes his waistcoat, his breeches, his shirt, and replaces them with a long white nightshirt of soft linen that the chambermaid has laid out upon the foot of the bed. He pulls a soft white nightcap upon his head, a cap with a long tasselled point that hangs down behind his ear, and at last he climbs into the great soft bed and draws the indigo coverlet up to his chin. But before he extinguishes his candle, he may sit for a long quiet moment in the bed, his back against the goose-feather pillows, his hands folded upon the coverlet, gazing into the small flame of the candle and listening to the small sounds of the house as it settles into its own night. He may hear the floorboards of the public room below as the last patrons take their leave, the soft thud of the great front door as the keeper closes it for the night, the distant rattle of the chambermaid's footsteps as she carries away the last of the supper dishes, the quiet murmur of the keeper and his wife as they speak together in some lower room about the small business of the morrow. And at last, when the house has settled into its full nightly quietness, the traveller will lean toward his candle, will purse his lips and will blow it gently out, sending up a small thread of pale grey smoke that will hang in the dark air of the chamber for perhaps a minute before dispersing into the warm darkness, and he will lay back upon the goose-feather pillows, and he will close his eyes, and he will allow the deep, unhurried sleep of the colonial night to receive him into its long, slow embrace. There is more to the tavern than the public room and the upper chambers, and as the hour deepens and your thoughts grow ever more diffuse, allow your imagination to descend now into the cooler precincts beneath the building and to wander outward into the small kitchen garden that lies behind it, for these regions too are part of the slow life of the colonial inn, and the contemplation of them will deepen the soft enchantment of the hour. Beneath the public room, reached by a narrow flight of stone steps that descend from a small door in the rear passage, there lies the cellar of the tavern, long low chamber of brick walls and earthen floor that has been kept since the building of the house as a place of cool dry storage for the perishable goods of the establishment. The cellar is lit when one descends into it by a single oil lamp that the keeper carries with him, and its light moves slowly along the brick walls and across the rounded barrels and the wooden shelves to reveal the quiet kingdom that the cellar has made of itself. The walls of the cellar are of dry-laid brick, the bricks darker than those of the hearth above, their mortar more coarse, their courses less regular, for the cellar was built as a working chamber rather than as a piece of finished architecture. Along these walls there hang small iron hooks from which depend the various bundles and bags that the cellar has been asked to keep, a long string of dried sausages, their casings dark and shrunken and pricked all over with small white speckles of rendered fat, great ham hung from a stout cord at one corner, its rind dark mahogany, its fat pale, the whole wrapped in a clean linen cloth that has been tied at the top with a piece of jute. Along one wall there runs a long row of wine barrels and cider barrels, set upon a low rack of stout oak timbers that holds them at the proper angle for tapping. The barrels are of varying sizes, some great hogsheads of 54 gallons, some smaller barrels of 15, and each one bears upon its end a small painted mark, by which the keeper may identify its contents and the date of its filling. The wood of the barrels is dark and slightly damp to the touch, and where a tap has been driven into one of them, there is a small brass spigot from which the keeper may draw a measure of cider or wine into a wooden pitcher. Along another wall there are wooden shelves on which the keeper has arranged the smaller stores of the tavern's larder. There are great stoneware crocks of salt pork, the meat preserved in its own brine, the lid of each crock weighted down with a heavy round stone. There are smaller crocks of butter packed in salt for the winter months, and crocks of lard rendered from the autumn pigs, and crocks of preserved beans put up in early summer when the bean crop was at its height. There are wooden boxes of apples, the apples wrapped each one in a piece of newspaper and laid in straw to keep them from touching, the boxes labelled in the cook's careful hand with the variety of apple within. There are baskets of potatoes and turnips and carrots and parsnips laid in dry sand to keep them from sprouting, and a great mound of yellow onions in a wooden bin, their papery skins rustling faintly when the lamp passes near. The air of the cellar is cool and faintly perfumed with the deep mingled scents of all of these stores, the saltiness of the pork and the cured ham, the sweetness of the apples, the earthy clean smell of the root vegetables, the slightly yeasty aroma of the cider barrels, the sharper note of the dried sausages, the soft underlying perfume of the brick and the seasoned oak. The temperature of the cellar holds steady year-round at perhaps 55 degrees, kept cool in summer by the depth of the earth above it, kept warm in winter by the same insulating earth, so that the stores within remain in their best condition through every season. In the far corner of the cellar there is a small spring that bubbles up from the earth into a hollow lined with smooth river stones, and from this small spring a slender stream of cool clear water runs across the cellar floor in a shallow channel of stones and out through a small drain in the wall. Within the spring there are kept those things that require the coolest possible storage: small crocks of cream that the cook will use for tomorrow's puddings, a wooden basin in which a few fresh trout from the morning's market lie upon a bed of crushed ice, cut from the icehouse last winter, a stone jar of fresh milk drawn that very afternoon from the cow in the small barn behind the tavern. Above the cellar, beyond the rear wall of the tavern and reached by a small back door from the kitchen passage, there lies the kitchen garden of the establishment, a rectangular plot perhaps 30 feet by 40, enclosed on 3 sides by a low brick wall topped with a wooden coping. The garden is asleep now in the sense that the autumn has stripped most of its productive crops and left only the late stragglers. But it is not yet bare, and in the soft moonlight of this October night it presents to the imagination a quiet small landscape of considerable beauty. The beds of the garden are laid out in a simple rectangular pattern, with narrow paths of brick or trodden earth running between them. In the central beds there are still the late vegetables of the season, a row of Brussels sprouts whose small green knobs cluster along their tall, thick stalks, a row of late kale whose dark blue-green leaves are slightly curled at the edges by the recent light frosts, few cabbages of considerable size whose pale outer leaves are spreading wide upon the ground while their tighter inner heads remain firm and close. In a corner there is a patch of leeks, their grey-green leaves thick and sturdy, their white shafts thickening below the soil for the winter's harvest. Along the perimeter of the garden, against the brick wall on its sunniest side, there are the perennial herbs, the great rosemary bush whose woody stems still bear their slender, fragrant leaves, the thyme spreading low across the ground in a soft grey-green carpet, the sage with its larger furred leaves, the chives whose hollow tubes have died down for the year, but whose roots hold patient beneath the soil. There is a small bay tree in a wooden tub, its dark, glossy leaves still firm against the autumn cold, and a clump of mint that has been allowed to spread along the base of the wall in a small green colony. Beside the herb border, there is a small bed of medicinal plants that the keeper's wife has tended through the years: the comfrey for poultices, the yarrow for fevers, the chamomile for the soothing tea that calms a restless mind, the lavender for the small sachets and the lavender water of the upper chambers, the calendula whose orange flowers have all but finished their long blooming. These plants she gathers and dries and tucks away in small paper packets in a wooden box upon the kitchen shelf against the small medical needs of the household and the occasional traveller. In the very back of the garden, against the rear wall, there is a small wooden bench upon which the keeper or his wife may sit on a fair afternoon to rest from their labours, and beside the bench there grows an apple tree of considerable age, its trunk twisted and gnarled, Trump Protestantis branches spreading wide above the bench in a great patient canopy. The tree is bare now of fruit, the apples having been picked some weeks ago and laid in their boxes in the cellar below, but a few yellowing leaves still cling to its branches, and in the soft autumn moonlight the tree casts a slow mottled shadow upon the brick wall behind it. Above the garden, above the tavern itself, the great vault of the night sky stretches in a deep, clear black sprinkled with the slow, steady multitude of the stars. There is no haze of city light to dim them, no glow of distant industry, no aircraft to streak across them with their small red and white blinking. There is only the clean black sky and the silver river of the Milky Way and the slow, patient turning of the constellations. The great square of Pegasus rising in the east, the long winding form of Cetus low in the south, the bright single eye of the star Capella climbing in the northeast, the small jewel cluster of the Pleiades twinkling above the rooftops in their 7 small points of light. The world beyond the tavern is sleeping now, the houses of the lane darkening one by one as the candles in their windows are extinguished, the chimneys releasing their last slender plumes of smoke into the night sky. The dogs in the backyards curling themselves into their straw beds in the small wooden kennels, the horses in the stables breathing the slow steady breath of equine sleep. Only the tavern remains awake, its windows still glowing with the warm amber light of its candles and its hearth, its slow conversations still threading themselves through the quiet air, its slow rituals still unfolding in their patient sequence. And around the tavern, around the lane, around the small town of Williamsburg, there extend the great forests and fields of colonial Virginia, the tobacco fields stripped bare for the year, the corn stubble brown and rustling, the woodlands losing their last leaves in slow drifts to the forest floor, the rivers running cold and clear toward the Chesapeake, all of it sleeping, all of it breathing, all of it held within the great soft enclosure of the autumn night, and you in your Windsor chair by the fire held within it as well, sinking deeper and deeper into the slow, sweet dreaming hour. Permit your thoughts now to turn inward, to drift away from the small details of the room around you and to settle upon the slower, deeper currents that run beneath this evening, the currents of time itself, of the slow, patient passage of the years that have flowed through this tavern since its first beam was raised and its first candle was lit. For there is in any old room a dimension that is not quite of the present moment, but of all the moments that have layered themselves upon the room across the long sequence of its existence. And to perceive this dimension is to enter into a quieter and more contemplative mode of being than the ordinary daylight allows. Consider the wood of the beam above your head, the great hewn timber of yellow pine that crosses the ceiling some 7 feet above the floor. That timber was once a living tree, growing somewhere in the great forests of the Virginia tidewater, perhaps 50 or 60 years before this tavern was built, drawing up the rains of countless springs through its slow patient roots, opening its needles to the suns of countless summers, casting its small cones to the forest floor through countless autumns, standing through the snows and ice storms of countless winters. The rings within that timber were one to cut a cross-section of it, would reveal the entire patient biography of the tree, the wide rings of the wet years, the narrow rings of the drier years, the small dark scars of fires that licked at its base, the slight irregularities of the years when an insect or a storm caused the tree some small disturbance. And then at some point in its long, slow life, the tree was felled by axemen working in the cool mornings of an early winter, brought down with a great soft crash to the forest floor, stripped of its branches, dragged by oxen to the nearest sawmill, or shaped on site by men with broad axes and adzes, hewn into the square timber that was then loaded upon a wagon and carted to the building site where the tavern was rising course by course from its foundation. The axemen who hewed that timber are long dead, their names forgotten, their faces remembered by no one now living, but their work remains, their slow patient strokes preserved in the soft scalloped marks along the sides of the beam, marks that you may read if you look carefully enough as the firelight dances across the dark wood. And the carpenters who raised the beam, who lifted it into place by means of ropes and pulleys, and the muscular cooperation of perhaps a dozen men, who pegged it into the upright posts with stout oak tree-nails driven through carefully bored holes, those carpenters are gone as well, their voices long since silenced, their tools long since rusted into nothingness or scattered to other workshops in other generations. But the beam remains, the joinery remains, the careful cooperation of their long-ago morning is preserved in the very structure of the room above your head. This is the patient wisdom of old wood, that it carries forward into the present the labour of those who shaped it, and that it does so without any ostentation, without any plea for recognition, without any need for praise. The beam simply continues to do its work, holding up the floor of the upper chambers, supporting the weight of the chimney, keeping the rain from your head as you sit in your Windsor chair, all of it accomplished through the silent, steady persistence of seasoned wood that has been doing its job for nearly half a century already and will continue to do it for another 2 centuries or more. Consider also the floor beneath your feet, those broad pine planks that have been worn slightly cupped by the passage of countless feet across the years. Each plank was laid down by some carpenter of an earlier year, fitted to its neighbours with the careful precision of the joiner's plane, nailed to the joists below with hand-forged iron nails whose square heads still show as small dark squares scattered across the planks like the punctuation of an old manuscript. And every footstep that has fallen upon those planks from the day they were first laid to this very evening has contributed in some infinitesimal measure to their slow softening, their gradual cupping, their gentle aging into the surface that supports you now. The patrons whose feet have crossed these floors form a long invisible procession, stretching back through the decades since the tavern was built, a procession of merchants and travellers and townsfolk and farmers, of gentlemen in fine coats and labourers in homespun, of women in silks and women in linen, of children who came once with their parents for a small treat of cider and never returned, of elderly men who came every evening for years until their last evening came and went without their knowing it. All of them have walked across these planks, all of them have sat in chairs by these tables, all of them have warmed themselves by this hearth, and all of them are gone, and the planks remain. And the planks remember in their soft cupping and their faint scattered marks the long quiet residue of all those vanished footsteps. This is the quality of old places, that they carry within themselves the soft inscription of all the lives that have passed through them, and that this inscription is not legible to any single eye, but is sensed rather as a kind of atmosphere, a kind of warmth, a kind of patient depth that newer rooms do not possess. To sit in such a place is to sit in the company of all of those vanished lives, not as ghosts in any troubling sense, but as a kind of gentle accumulated humanity, a soft layering of presence that thickens the very air and makes the room feel more full than its current occupants alone could make it. Consider further the small objects within the room, each one carrying its own small history. The pewter tankard from which you have been drinking your cider was cast by a pewterer in Boston perhaps 30 years ago. The metal melted in his iron pot and poured into a brass mould, the resulting form turned upon his lathe to refine its shape, the handle attached separately and then soldered with the careful application of a lead solder. That pewterer is dead now, his shop no longer in business, his apprentices scattered to other trades or to other towns, but his tankard sits in your hand, its weight and its cool, smooth surface a small testimony to the patient skill of his vanished work. The pewter itself is an alloy of tin and lead and a small portion of copper, and the tin came from the mines of Cornwall in the far west of England, brought up in dark stones from deep beneath the earth, and refined into ingots in the smelting houses of Truro and Penzance, then carried in ships across the great Atlantic to the merchants of Boston, then sold to the pewterer for his work. The lead came perhaps from the same English mines, perhaps from the mines of Saxony, travelling its own long, invisible journey to the pewterer's pot. The copper came perhaps from Sweden, perhaps from the new mines opening in the New England colonies. And all of these elements, gathered from across the world, melted and combined and shaped, are now in your hand as a single warm tankard that is, in some sense, a small condensation of the entire trading network of the Atlantic world. Consider the candle that burns upon your table, the simple cylinder of beeswax from which a slender wick rises, and from which a soft golden flame casts its patient light across your evening. That wax was gathered from the comb of a hive of bees, and the bees had drawn the wax from their own bodies, sweating it in tiny scales from glands beneath their abdomens, and they had built it into the great patient hexagonal architecture of their comb. Then they had filled that comb with the honey they had gathered from the flowers of 1,000 summer mornings, and the beekeeper had taken the comb and pressed out the honey for the table, and rendered the wax in a great copper kettle to make the candles for the long winter evenings of the household. And so when you look at the candle upon your table, you are looking at a slow distillation of summer, at the patient labour of a hive of bees who flew from blossom to blossom in the warm sunshine of June and July, gathering the gold of countless small flowers and bringing it back to their hive to be refined into the wax that now burns before you. Each small flicker of the flame is, in some sense, a small flicker of summer flowers, a small remembering of warm afternoons and the soft hum of bees and the deep patient chemistry of the hive. To sit in candlelight is to sit in the slow ghost of summer, even in the heart of October. Such reflections drifting gently through your mind as the hour deepens, are the natural meditations of the tavern's quiet hour. They are not pursued, not insisted upon, not made into philosophy. They simply arise like the slow curls of smoke from the hearth, and they drift through the warm air of the room for a few moments before dispersing into the larger atmosphere of the night. They leave behind a soft residue of contemplation, a deepening of the sense that one is not alone in the present moment, but is accompanied, however invisibly, by all of the patient labour and all of the slow living that has flowed through this place across the years. You sink a little deeper into your chair, and the chair receives your weight with the same quiet acceptance with which it has received the weight of all those who have sat in it before you. The fire continues its slow burning. The clock continues its slow ticking. The candles continue their slow consuming of their patient summer wax. And outside, beyond the wavering glass of the windows, the great patient stars continue their slow turning, and the world sleeps, and time itself seems to soften into a long quiet pool in which all of the moments of all of the years drift gently together like leaves upon still water. There is a philosophy embedded in this colonial evening, a quiet way of being in the world that the room itself teaches without ever speaking of it directly. And as the hour grows later, and your senses settle ever more deeply into the soft enclosure of the tavern, allow this philosophy to begin to make itself felt in your inner being, for it is one of the great unspoken gifts that the past offers to those who pause long enough to receive it. The philosophy of this room may be called, for want of a better name, the soft philosophy of smallness. It is the recognition that the human life is well lived within a circle of modest dimensions, that the deepest pleasures are not the rarest or the most elaborate, but the simplest and most regularly available, that the warm fire and the small meal and the quiet conversation and the unhurried hour are not consolation prizes for those who cannot afford grander things but are themselves, properly understood, the richest of all possible human goods. The patrons of this tavern do not appear to be straining toward anything beyond what the evening offers. They are not dreaming of larger tankards, brighter candles, more elaborate suppers, more luxurious chairs. They are not wishing themselves elsewhere, in some grander tavern in London or some more fashionable establishment in Philadelphia. They are simply here, in this room, with these companions, drinking this cider, eating this bread, watching this fire, and they are by every visible sign deeply content. This contentment is not an accident, nor is it merely the temperamental gift of unusually placid souls. It is the result of a long cultivation, a patient training of the spirit to find its sufficiency within the bounds of the ordinary day. The colonial age, for all its hardships and its losses, possessed a certain gentle wisdom about the relationship between desire and possession, a wisdom that knew how to let the small actual things of life expand within the spirit until they filled the spirit entirely, leaving no hungry corner where some larger imagined thing might gnaw and complain. To watch the elderly gentleman in his alcove sitting silently with his walking stick across his knees, his eyes half closed, his face composed in soft repose, is to see a master of this philosophy at his quiet practice. He has come to the tavern not for any particular pleasure, but for the simple pleasure of being in a warm room among kindly people, and that pleasure is sufficient unto itself, and it does not require to be supplemented or enhanced or surpassed. He is in his small alcove in possession of all that he requires, and his face shows the deep peace of a man who has long since made peace with the modest scale of human happiness. The merchants by the hearth practice their own version of the same philosophy, though they may not articulate it to themselves in such terms. They are men of business, men accustomed to weighing and measuring and calculating, and they have arrived at this evening with the day's labours behind them, and have given themselves permission to set those labours aside for the duration of the supper hour. They are not pursuing further business at this table. They are not negotiating, not contracting, not driving any small bargain. They are simply talking, simply enjoying the company of one another, simply allowing the evening to unfold without trying to extract from it any further productive value. This too is the philosophy of smallness, the recognition that there is a time for striving and a time for ceasing to strive, and that the failure to recognize the second time is one of the principal sources of human unhappiness. The young woman by the window, working out the small private detail of her sampler in the company of her father, is practicing yet another version of the same gentle wisdom. Her sampler is a small thing, a piece of linen, perhaps a foot square, upon which she is embroidering a verse and a border of flowers. It is not destined for any great display, not intended to bring her fame or fortune, or even any particular notice, beyond the small notice of her family, who will admire it when it is finished, and perhaps frame it to hang upon a wall of the family parlour. And yet the working of it is filling her present hours with quiet purpose, with the small deep satisfactions of skilled handwork, with the patient meditation that needlework grants to those who undertake it with proper attention. She is, in her small evening's occupation, a participant in one of the great quiet traditions of the female life of her age, the tradition of the slow patient making of beautiful small things by hand. This tradition has flowed through countless parlours and bedchambers across the centuries, and it has produced an enormous quiet legacy of samplers and quilts and embroideries and laces, most of them now scattered or lost or preserved only in the corners of small museums, but all of them having served their original purpose of filling the long hours of their makers with quiet attention and small deep pleasure. The keeper of the tavern at his bar embodies the philosophy of smallness in his own particular way. His establishment is not a great one. He does not aspire to be the proprietor of a famous inn known throughout the colonies. He is content to keep this one room, these few chambers above, this small kitchen and its patient cook, this cellar with its barrels and its stores. His ambition extends no further than the next morning's breakfast, the next afternoon's preparations, the next evening's quiet supper. And within this modest scope he applies himself with a careful diligence, a patient kindliness toward his patrons, a quiet pride in the work that he has chosen. There is, in the cumulative effect of all of these small practitioners of the soft philosophy, a kind of communal teaching that flows through the room and reaches even those who, like yourself, have not consciously sought it out. To sit in such a room is to be quietly schooled in the art of being satisfied with what is present, of finding the deep sweetness in the small portion, of allowing the unhurried hour to fill the spirit until the spirit needs nothing further. It is a schooling that proceeds by example rather than by precept, that requires no instruction beyond the simple observation of how human beings may sit together in a warm room without the gnawing of any present discontent. The modern world, into which you must eventually return, has made this soft philosophy considerably more difficult to practice. The modern world is full of larger things, brighter things, faster things, things that promise greater pleasures and demand greater attention and consume greater energies in their pursuit. The modern world has made the small actual moment of present life into a kind of way station between larger imagined moments rather than a destination in its own right. And so the modern soul is often hungry, often restless, often troubled by the sense that wherever it is, there must be somewhere better that it ought to be instead. But here in this room, in this evening, in this slow autumnal hour of 1770, the soft philosophy of smallness is alive and at work, and it offers itself as a gentle medicine to your weary modern spirit. Take the medicine slowly, in small sips like the cider in your tankard. Let it spread through you with the same unhurried warmth. Allow it to teach your body and your mind that this present moment, this small warm room, this single chair by the fire, this quiet company of strangers from another century, is itself a sufficient world, requires no enhancement, demands no comparison with any other possible world, tasks of you nothing but your willingness to be present within it. The philosophy of smallness is not an austerity, though it may sound like one. It is in fact a kind of secret abundance, the discovery that a small thing fully attended to opens out into a vastness that no quantity of unattended large things could ever match. The single candle upon your table, fully attended to, contains within itself the entire summer of bees and flowers from which its wax was distilled, the entire patient labour of the chandler who made it, the entire warm history of evenings illuminated by such candles across the centuries. The single tankard of cider, fully attended to, contains the entire orchard of autumn apples, the entire labour of pressing and fermenting, the entire deep tradition of cider making that flows from medieval England through colonial America. To drink the cider with full attention is to drink, in a quiet metaphysical sense, all of these things at once, and the resulting pleasure is not small but deep, not modest but profound. The room around you breathes its slow, contented breath, and you breathe with it, and the philosophy that no one is teaching you nonetheless, by the simple fact of your sitting here in its warm light. You have been quietly converted in the course of this evening into a temporary practitioner of the soft philosophy of smallness, and the conversion sits well upon you like a soft cloak of indigo wool that the keeper has draped over your shoulders without your having asked for it. You wear it now without knowing that you wear it, and it warms you, and you are content. As the candles burn lower upon the tables and the fire settles into its deeper coals, the room enters into what might be called the slow hour of second reflections, that particular phase of the colonial evening when the conversations have grown quieter, the bodies more relaxed, the minds more receptive to the deeper currents that flow beneath the surface of immediate experience. This is the hour when those who sit in such rooms have always been most likely to encounter, in the soft, unfocused regions of their thought, the faces of the past, the remembered and half-remembered figures of their own lives and of the lives that came before them, drifting up through the warm air of the room like the pale leaves of an old book turning slowly upon a quiet reading table. In your own thoughts, settling now into the patient drift that the late hour permits, there may begin to arise the soft images of those who came before you, your parents perhaps, your grandparents, the great-grandparents you knew only through old stories or old portraits, further ancestors who dissolve into the gentle haze of historical anonymity, and yet whose blood runs in your veins and whose patient labour across the centuries is the reason you exist to sit in this Windsor chair tonight. These figures rise gently through your awareness, not with any vivid clarity, but with a kind of soft warmth, a sense of presence, a feeling that you are, in some unhurried sense, the latest small bead upon a very long, quiet string. The colonial age was an age that lived consciously within this awareness of the long string of generations. The patrons of this tavern sitting around their tables tonight would have spoken easily and frequently of their parents and their grandparents, of the great-grandfather who first crossed the Atlantic from the village of his birth, off the ancestral home in Norfolk or in Suffolk or in the lowlands of Scotland or in the green valleys of Wales. They would have known the names and the rough biographies of figures 3 and 4 generations distant, and these figures would not have been to them merely names but living presences, mentioned in family stories told around the hearth, invoked in the small ritual moments of family life, recalled at the births and the marriages and the deaths. The young woman by the window working her sampler tonight has perhaps already chosen the verse that will form its central panel, and that verse may have been chosen because it was a favourite of her grandmother, who taught her to sew when she was very small. The upstairs bedchamber of the family house on a quiet morning when the rain was streaming down the window panes outside, and the grandmother sat in her rocking chair with the small girl beside her, guiding the little hands through their first uncertain stitches. The grandmother is dead now, perhaps these 5 or 6 years, but her presence flows through the working of the sampler in a way that the young woman feels but does not always articulate, a soft accompanying warmth that turns the labour into a kind of slow remembering. The elderly gentleman with the walking stick in his alcove is perhaps thinking of his own grandfather, who came to Virginia from Yorkshire in the year 1690, carrying with him a small leather trunk of belongings and a few coins sewn into the lining of his coat, Tand, who took up land in the tidewater, and slowly built the small estate upon which the gentleman's father was born, and on which he himself was raised. The gentleman has seen this grandfather only in a small painted portrait that hangs in the parlour of the family house, a face from another century rendered in the somewhat stiff manner of the period, the eyes painted dark, the wig white, the coat a deep crimson. But he has heard so many stories of this grandfather that the painted face has come to feel like the face of a known acquaintance, and in his quiet musings now the grandfather rises up before him as a kind of patient companion to his old age. The merchants by the hearth, in the small pauses of their conversation, may each be thinking of their own absent kinsmen, the brothers and uncles and cousins whose business affairs intersect with their own across the great distances of the colonial trading network. They may be thinking of a brother in London who manages the family's affairs in the metropolis, of a cousin in Charleston who has lately written of difficulties in the rice trade, of an elderly aunt in a country house in Hampshire who writes long letters of family news that arrive in Williamsburg by the autumn and spring fleets. The names and the situations of these absent kinsmen form a kind of constant background music to the merchants' lives, a network of remembered presences that extends across the Atlantic in a great soft web of family and commerce. You yourself in your Windsor chair may find that your own memories begin to rise more freely now, the faces of those you have loved and lost, the small remembered scenes of your own past, the smell of a kitchen from your childhood, the sound of a voice that you have not heard in many years. These memories arise without the sharper edges that they sometimes have in the busier hours of the day, when memory can sometimes feel like an interruption or a regret. In this slow hour of second reflections, the memories arise gently, accompanied by no sting of loss, no sharp pang of longing, but rather by a soft, warm sense of having been loved, of having loved in return, of being part of a long, unbroken chain of human affection that runs back through your own life and outward through the lives of those who held you as a child. The tavern fosters this kind of reflection, perhaps because the room itself is so saturated with the residues of past presences, perhaps because the old wood and the soft light and the slow rituals predispose the mind to the contemplative mode, perhaps because the company of strangers, paradoxically, frees the inner life to range more widely than it sometimes does in the company of intimates. Whatever the cause, the late hour in such a room has always been an hour for the gentle communion with one's own dead, with one's own deep past, with the faces and voices that no longer exist in the daylit world but that continue to live in the soft chambers of the memory. The fire upon the hearth, settling into its deepest coals now, casts a particular kind of light at this hour, a dimmer and more golden light than the brighter flames of the supper hour, a light that flickers more slowly and pools more deeply in the corners of the room. This is the light by which the old faces show themselves most clearly, not in any spectral or unsettling way, but as gentle presences brought to the surface of consciousness by the soft, conducive atmosphere of the room. The colonial generations knew this light well, knew its propensity to invite the reflective mood, and they did not flee from it as the modern world sometimes flees from its own quieter hours. They sat in this light with their tankards and their pipes and their quiet companions, and they let the old faces rise as the old faces wished to rise, and they treated this rising as one of the natural pleasures of the evening. Among the figures rising in your own thoughts now, there may be one in particular who returns with a special soft insistence, a particular grandparent perhaps, a particular friend long gone, particular face that you had not consciously thought of for many years but that finds in this hour an opportunity to come back to you. Let that face come. Look at it with the unhurried gaze of the late hour. Notice how the features compose themselves, how the eyes look at you, how the mouth seems on the verge of a familiar word. There is no obligation here, no demand that you do anything with this rising face. It is enough that you have welcomed it for a moment into the warm enclosure of the tavern, that you have allowed it to share your fire and your candle, that you have given it a small visit before it returns to its rest. And then, slowly, gently, the face fades, drifting back into the deeper regions of memory from which it arose, leaving behind a soft, warm trace, a feeling of having been quietly visited by something dear. The room continues its slow breathing, the fire continues its slow burning, the clock continues its slow ticking, the other patrons continue their own quiet reflections, and you, in your chair by the hearth, settle deeper into the patient companionship of the colonial night that has shown itself to be not only a refuge from the modern hurry, but a small portal through which the longer, slower currents of human existence may be felt flowing once again across the threshold of conscious life. There is a particular gentleness with which the colonial age regarded the small things that pass from one generation to another, a tenderness toward the slow inheritance of objects that the modern world, with its rapid replacements and its disposable goods, has largely forgotten. The patrons of this tavern tonight live in a world where most of the objects they touch have been touched by others before them, where the silver spoon at the table once belonged to a mother or an aunt, where the small wooden box upon the mantel was made by a grandfather in a workshop long since closed, where the linen of the napkin was woven by a woman whose hands lie now beneath a quiet stone in some country churchyard. Every object carries within it the soft warmth of these previous custodians, and to handle such an object is in some quiet sense to be in communion with them. Consider the silver salt cellar that stands upon the table by the window where the gentleman and his daughter are seated. It is a small-footed dish of sterling silver, perhaps 3 inches in diameter, with a slightly raised rim and 3 small ball feet upon which it rests. The bowl of the dish holds a small mound of fine white salt, slightly damp from the autumnal humidity, into which a tiny silver spoon has been placed. The salt cellar bears upon its underside the small marks of the silversmith who made it, a London hallmark dating from the year 1712, the lion passant of sterling silver, the leopard's head crowned of London, and the small letter P that marks the year of its making. This salt cellar was made by a silversmith whose shop stood in Gutter Lane in the city of London nearly 60 years ago, and it was acquired by the gentleman's grandfather during a journey to England in the year 1715, and it has been on the family table every evening for half a century now, used by 3 generations, polished by countless hands. The small dent in one side of the rim was made when the gentleman himself was a young boy and accidentally knocked it from the table, and his grandmother, instead of scolding him, had laughed softly and said that the dent would help them remember him, and so the dent remains. Small bright mark of love preserved in the soft metal of the cellar. Consider also the linen napkin upon which the daughter has just laid down her spoon, a square of fine bleached linen, perhaps 18 inches on a side, woven in a small repeating pattern of birds and leaves. This napkin was woven by the daughter's mother as part of her wedding linen some 25 years ago, on a small loom that stood in the parlour of her own mother's house. The thread spun from flax grown in a Virginia field, the pattern chosen from a book of weaving designs that the mother's grandmother had brought from England as a young bride. The napkin has been laundered hundreds of times now, has softened to a particular cream white, has gathered the small unobtrusive marks that long use leaves upon fine fabric, and the daughter, when she takes it up to wipe her lips, in some quiet sense being touched by her mother's hands and her grandmother's hands and her great-grandmother's hands all at once. The colonial age understood the deep value of such small inheritances. It understood that an object made carefully and used carefully across the generations becomes, over time, far more than the sum of its material components, becomes a kind of quiet vessel for the love that has flowed through it, from one set of hands to another. This understanding shaped the way that things were made in this age with a care and a durability that anticipated long generations of use, and it shaped the way that things were used with a respect and an attentiveness that honoured the long history of their making. Consider the leather-bound book upon the table of the gentleman who reads alone by the front window. The book is a collection of sermons by a Mr. Tillotson, printed in London in the year 1720, and it was bound by a London bookbinder in dark brown calf with 5 raised bands across the spine. The title stamped in faded gold upon a small red leather panel between the 2nd and 3rd bands. The book belonged originally to the gentleman's father, who had purchased it as a young man during his student years, and who had read and reread it across his long life, marking certain passages with small pencil marks in the margin, and turning down the corner of certain pages that contained passages of particular meaning to him. The gentleman now reads the book in his father's old age, sitting in this tavern by the wavering window, and as he reads he encounters the small pencil marks of his father and the turned-down corners, and he reads not only the sermons of Mr. Tillotson, but also, in some subtler dimension, the patient attention that his father gave to those sermons many years ago. When he turns a page that his father once turned, his finger touches a paper that his father's finger touched, and the connection across the years is small but real, a soft thread of continuity that runs through the leather and the paper and the printed words. Such books were treated in the colonial age with a respect appropriate to their nature as small, slow vessels of mind. They were rebound when their bindings wore out. They were repaired when their pages tore. They were carefully preserved in cabinets that protected them from damp and from sun. and when their owners died, they were passed on to children or grandchildren who would receive them not as simple property but as continuations of the deceased reader's life of mind, small libraries of the soul that the new owner might enter at his leisure across the rest of his own life. The objects of the tavern itself participate in this same tradition of careful inheritance. The Windsor chair upon which you are seated was made by a chairmaker named Joseph Tucker some 20 years ago, in a small workshop that still stands at the corner of Nicholson Street, where his son now carries on the business under the same name. The chair has been in the tavern since the year of its making, has been sat upon by perhaps 1,000 patrons across those years, has been waxed and polished by the chambermaid every fortnight, has been mended once when one of its spindles cracked and was replaced by Joseph's son when the elder Mr. Tucker had grown too old for the finer work. And yet the chair remains the same chair, holds within itself the same patient design, the same understanding of how a human body wishes to rest at the end of a long day, that Joseph Tucker brought to its making in his shop on a winter morning in the year 1750. The pewter spoon with which you stirred your stew tonight was cast by a pewterer in Philadelphia about 15 years ago, and the keeper of the tavern bought a dozen such spoons at one purchase and has had them in service ever since. Some of the spoons have grown slightly bent in the bowl, some have small dents along the handle, some have a pleasant softening of the edges from long polishing, but all of them continue to perform their patient work of conveying soup and stew from bowl to mouth. And they will continue to do so for another 50 years or more, until at last they become so worn or damaged that they will be melted down and recast into new spoons, the metal continuing its slow journey through a third or fourth or fifth incarnation. The very plates upon which you ate, the soft creamware pieces with their pierced borders, were made by a potter in the Staffordshire countryside in the year 1767, and they crossed the Atlantic in a wooden crate packed with straw. Then they have been in the tavern's service for 3 years now, washed every evening in a wooden tub of warm soapy water, dried with linen towels, stacked in the kitchen cupboard against the next day's use. They will serve in this way for many years, and as they serve they will gather their own small history, their small chips and crazings and faint stains, until at last each plate's individual character will mark it as distinct from its fellows. Old friend, known by its particular pattern of soft imperfections. This slow, patient relationship with objects, this tenderness toward the small inheritances of daily life, is one of the deeper gifts that the colonial age has to offer to a modern visitor of contemplative inclination. It teaches that things properly cared for and properly used may extend the warmth of human connection across great distances of time, may carry love and labour and attention from one generation to another, may serve as small quiet ambassadors of the past into the present. It teaches that to use an object well is to participate in a kind of slow cooperation with its maker and with its previous users, a cooperation that extends the meaning of one's daily life beyond the narrow bounds of one's own years. You take a final, small, slow sip of your cider from the pewter tankard, and you feel as you do so the warm metal in your hand, the soft, worn smoothness of the rim against your lip, the quiet weight of an object that has been held by countless hands before yours, and you set the tankard back upon the table with a soft small care, treating it as the colonial patron would treat it, as a small companion in the long evening rather than a disposable utensil of the moment. The tankard rests upon the wood of the table, and the wood of the table rests upon the floor, and the floor rests upon the joists below, and the entire patient architecture of the tavern holds you within itself, and you, in turn, hold within your hands the small evidence of all the kindly hands that have shaped this place and brought it to this evening, this hour, this gentle moment of your quiet visit. The candles upon the tables have burned down now to perhaps half of their original height, and the wax has gathered around their bases in soft pale puddles that glow faintly from within, where the flame's heat is still warming them. The fire upon the hearth has subsided into a deep glowing bed of coals across which only a few small lazy flames still play, and the keeper has not added a fresh log in some time, for the hour grows late and the room is settling toward its final quietness. The clock upon the mantel continues its slow patient tock, but the sound seems softer now than it did earlier, as though the very air of the room had thickened with sleep and were muffling all the gentler noises into a deeper hush. You feel, as you sit in your Windsor chair by the hearth, a delicious heaviness gathering in your limbs, a softness behind your eyes, a slowing of the thoughts that earlier had been moving through your mind in their patient procession. The thoughts now do not so much proceed as drift like small leaves upon a slow autumn stream, turning gently in the current, settling now and then into a small pool, drifting onward without any particular destination. This is the first drift towards sleep, the soft loosening of the hold that waking attention has upon the mind, and it is a drift that the colonial evening has been gently inviting since the moment you first crossed the threshold of the tavern door. The patrons around you are showing the same signs of soft surrender to the lateness of the hour. The young woman by the window has closed her small book of poems and laid her hand upon her father's sleeve, and the father is calling for the bill in his quiet, kind voice, and the serving boy is approaching their table with his small leather wallet and his quill and ink. The merchants by the hearth have grown quieter, their conversation reduced now to occasional soft remarks rather than the steadier flow of earlier. The elderly gentleman in his alcove has not stirred for some time, and his breathing has deepened into the slow rhythm of one who has slipped from waking repose into actual gentle sleep, his head leaning back against the panel of the screen, his walking stick resting upon his knees. The keeper at his bar has set aside his ledger and is now polishing pewter tankards with a soft linen cloth, his motions slow and meditative, the cloth moving in patient circles over the curved metal, each tankard gleaming a little more softly under his attention before being placed upon a small shelf with its companions. The serving woman has gone back to the kitchen to begin the slow preparation for closing, the gathering of the dishes that must be washed, the wiping of the tables that have been emptied, the small quiet readying of the room for the morning. You allow your eyes to close for a moment, just a moment, and the warmth of the fire continues to reach you through your closed lids, the soft golden orange of the firelight pressing gently against the inside of your eyes. You hear the slow tock of the clock, the soft crackle of a coal in the hearth, the distant murmur of a conversation, the small soft footstep of the serving woman returning from the kitchen. You hear the slow soft breathing of the elderly gentleman in his alcove, the small careful sound of the serving boy's quill scratching upon the paper of the bill he is making out, the gentle rustle of the young woman's silk gown as she rises from her chair. When you open your eyes again, only a few moments seem to have passed, but the room has changed in some subtle way, has grown perhaps a touch dimmer, a touch quieter, a touch softer at all of its edges. The candles have burned a little lower, the fire has subsided a little further, the shadows have grown a little longer. The hour has advanced by some imperceptible measure, and you are deeper now into the long, slow descent of the evening than you were when you closed your eyes. The young woman and her father are rising from their table, the father putting on his fine black coat with the slow, easy motions of a man who has eaten well and rested well, the daughter draping a light cloak of dark green wool over her shoulders. They make their slow progress toward the door, the father stopping briefly at the bar to exchange a quiet word with the keeper, the daughter waiting beside him with her small reticule clasped in her gloved hands. Then they pass through the door together into the cool autumn night, and the door closes behind them with its low, contented sigh, and the room is one small group quieter than it was. The merchants too begin to gather themselves for departure, but more slowly, with the unhurried leave-taking that the colonial gentleman has cultivated as one of the small arts of his life. The eldest of them rises first, his joints making a small soft sound as he stands, his hand reaching for the small clay pipe upon the table to tap out the last of its ash into a small pewter dish. The two younger merchants rise after him, their movements unhurried, their conversation continuing in soft tones as they move toward the wall of pegs to retrieve their hats and cloaks. You watch them perform the small ceremony of departure, the donning of the tricorn hats with their black silk linings, the wrapping of the long cloaks, the exchange of final pleasantries with the keeper and with the elderly gentleman who has been waked gently from his slumber by the small movement of their leaving. The merchants nod kindly to the elderly man, who nods kindly back, and there is a brief warm exchange of words that you cannot quite hear. And then the merchants too pass through the door into the night, and the room is yet another small group quieter. Now there remain in the public room only yourself, the elderly gentleman, the keeper, and the gentleman who has been reading by the front window all evening. The reader has not stirred for some time, but as the room grows quieter, he too closes his book at last, marks his place with a small slip of red ribbon, sets the book gently upon the table, and rises from his chair with the slow, careful manner of a man approaching 70. He gathers his hat and cloak, makes his quiet farewell to the keeper, and passes through the door into the night. And now the room is reduced to a small gathering of 3, with you in your Windsor chair, the elderly gentleman in his alcove, and the keeper at his bar. The keeper crosses the room now with his soft, slow tread, comes to your chair, and inquires in a low, kindly voice whether you would care for anything further before the late hour. You shake your head softly, smile a small smile, and indicate by a gentle gesture that you are content and that you require nothing more. The keeper nods and turns away, but as he turns he pauses for a moment at the hearth, takes up the small iron poker, and gives the bed of coals a single slow stir that releases a brief flurry of small bright sparks up into the chimney. Then he sets the poker back in its rack and continues on his way toward the bar. The elderly gentleman in his alcove begins now to stir more fully from his deep repose. He opens his eyes, blinks slowly, raises his hand to his face and rubs gently at his eyes, then takes up his walking stick and rises from his chair with the patient effort of his many years. He is smaller standing than he appeared seated, a slender, quiet figure in his soft grey coat, but he stands upright with the dignity of long habit, and as he makes his slow way toward the door he passes near your chair and gives you a small kind nod, his pale eyes meeting yours for a brief warm moment, and you nod back, and there is no need for any further communication between you. He has shared this evening with you in his silent way, and you have shared it with him, and the small acknowledgment of his nod is sufficient to honour what has passed between you. He reaches the door, lifts his hat from its peg, settles it slowly upon his white head, gathers his old cloak about his shoulders, and at last passes through the door into the autumn night, his walking stick tapping softly upon the stone of the threshold as he goes. The door closes behind him with its low sigh, and now the public room contains only yourself and the keeper, who has returned to his patient polishing of the pewter tankards behind his bar. The room is profoundly quiet now. The fire crackles gently, the clock tocks softly, the candles burn lower, the keeper polishes patiently, and you, in your Windsor chair by the hearth, sink ever more deeply into the warm, enclosing quietness of the late colonial evening, your eyes growing heavier, your breathing growing slower, your thoughts dissolving into the soft amber light that fills the space behind your closing eyelids. The first drift towards sleep has become a steady drift now, a slow patient flow toward the deeper waters of slumber, and you do not resist the flow but allow it to carry you onward, gently, gently into the long quiet night. The keeper has crossed the room once more, and now he moves with even greater softness than before, for he sees that you are nearly asleep in your chair, and he wishes not to disturb the gentle descent that is unfolding within you. He goes from candle to candle with his small brass snuffers, and one by one he extinguishes the tapers upon the empty tables, pressing the small bell of the snuffer down over each flame, smothering it gently into a thin pale ribbon of smoke that rises into the warm air and dissipates into the larger dimness of the room. With each extinguished candle the room grows a little dimmer, a little softer, a little more enfolded in the deepening amber glow of the dying fire. He does not extinguish the candle on your own table, for he sees that you are still drifting in the soft hinterland between waking and sleeping, and may wish for a small light yet a while. Instead, he goes to the front windows and draws the indigo linen curtains across them with a slow, patient motion, the curtains running along their wooden rods with a small, soft rustle, blocking the last cool gleams of the autumn night, and enclosing the room in a deeper, warmer privacy. The lane outside has grown entirely quiet now. The last walking man with his lantern long since disappeared, the last carriage long since passed, and the cobbles beyond the curtained windows lie in their patient silver silence beneath the slowly turning stars. The keeper returns to his bar, takes up a small iron candle holder with a single fresh candle, and prepares to retire for the night. But before he goes, he comes to your chair one last time, and he places a soft folded blanket of dark indigo wool across your lap with the gentlest of movements. The blanket is warm from having lain near the hearth, and its weight upon your lap is the perfect weight, neither too heavy nor too light, and its texture against the back of your hands is the soft warm texture of well-washed wool that has been gentled by long use. You have not asked for this blanket. He has offered it without inquiry, in the manner of one who understands that a guest sleeping in a chair by the fire on an October night will sleep more sweetly with a blanket across his lap. You murmur a small word of thanks, your voice barely audible, and the keeper nods softly and turns away, his candle in his hand, and he passes through the door at the rear of the public room into the small private region of his own quarters. You hear the door close behind him with its small soft sound, and then there is silence. The silence of a room that is settling into its final stillness for the night. The silence broken only by the slow patient tock of the clock upon the mantel, the soft occasional crackle of a coal in the hearth, and the gentle sound of your own slow breathing. The room around you has become now a place of pure soft enchantment, a small warm chamber held in the amber glow of the dying fire and the single remaining candle upon your table, the air thick with the patient perfume of the evening, wood smoke and beeswax, and the lingering trace of supper, the silence deep and peaceful and inviting. You sink further into your chair, the blanket warm across your lap, your hands folded gently upon the wool, your head resting against the comb back of the Windsor, your eyes nearly closed. In the slow, soft drifting of your mind, the room around you begins to merge with the inner landscape of approaching dreams. The fire upon the hearth becomes an old fire from your own remembered childhood, a fire by which you once sat as a small child while a grandparent told you a story whose words you have long forgotten, but whose warmth remains with you still. The slow tock of the clock becomes the slow tock of an old grandfather clock that stood in some hallway of your past, marking the hours of a house whose other rooms have faded from memory, but whose hallway with its clock remains. The wavering glass of the curtained windows seems to ripple slightly even with the curtains drawn, and through the ripples you imagine you can see the slow descent of leaves through autumn air, leaves of gold and rust and deep maroon falling slowly through a long quiet afternoon. The colonial age, the modern age, your own remembered past, the lives of those who came before you, the patient generations of patrons who have sat in this very chair before you, all of these begin to soften and merge in the warm amber drift of your closing consciousness. You are no longer entirely in the year 1770, but you are not entirely in any other year either. You are, rather, in a kind of long, quiet hallway of time itself. A hallway in which all of the years rest gently together like neighbours in a sleeping village, each year breathing its own slow breath, each year present without insistence, each year welcoming the others into its small enclosure. The blanket across your lap is warm, the chair beneath you is firm and patient, the fire before you is dying gently into its final embers, the candle upon your table burns low and steady, its flame a small unwavering point of gold in the deepening dimness. The clock upon the mantel ticks, softly, 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 the slow, patient heartbeat of the room. And you breathe slowly, 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 the breath of a body that has come at last to a place of complete rest. Let the warmth of the blanket spread through you, let the softness of the chair receive you, let the dimness of the room enfold you, let the slow tock of the clock become the slow tock of your own quiet heart. Let the soft glow of the dying fire become the soft glow that fills the inner space behind your closing eyes. There is nothing more to do tonight. There is nothing more to think about. There is nothing more to remember, nothing more to plan, nothing more to worry over. The colonial evening is folding itself around you like a great soft cloak of indigo wool. The tavern is folding itself around you like a great soft house of patient timber. The town of Williamsburg is folding itself around you like a great soft community of sleeping neighbours. The Virginia colony is folding itself around you like a great soft landscape of fields and forests and slow rivers running to the sea. And the great soft sky above is folding itself around all of these, the stars turning slowly, 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 each star a small bright point of patient, eternal light. You drift now into the deeper waters. The room becomes a memory. The chair becomes a memory. The blanket becomes a memory. The fire becomes a memory. The candle becomes a memory. All things become soft memories, drifting together in the warm, dark sea of approaching sleep. Sleep gently now. Sleep deeply. Sleep without dreams or with whatever soft dreams may wish to come to you. The colonial night holds you in its great kind hands. The patient generations who have slept in this place before you sleep now beside you in their long, quiet companionship. The soft glow of the dying fire warms you across the centuries. The slow tock of the old clock measures out the hours of your rest with the same patient cadence that it has measured out the rest of countless others. You are safe. You are warm, you are held, you are loved by all of the kindly hands that have ever made a place such as this for the comfort of a tired traveller. You are home in the deepest and softest sense of that word, home in the long quiet house of human gentleness that has always been here and that will always be here, waiting for those who pause long enough to find it. Sleep now, dear traveller. Sleep and rest. And let the soft amber light of the colonial evening shine upon you through all the long quiet hours of the night, and let the patient breathing of the old tavern accompany your own breathing, slow and deep and easy, until the morning comes, very far away, very far away, very far away. Sleep gently, sleep deeply, sleep. Welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.